Excellencies, may I kindly request that you take your respective seats so that we may begin. If you could take your seats to enable us begin the program of the day. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome to the opening of the resumed high-level segment on the occasion of the 27th session of the Conference of the Parties, the 17th session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the 4th session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. This morning, we are honored to have with us His Excellency Chaba Qureshi, President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. It is my distinct pleasure to invite His Excellency to address the plenary. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we were told many times that it is an implementation COP. I'm very glad. This is a moment to bridge the gaps between pledges and their fulfillment. Pledges to reduce emission, to improve adaptation measures, to repair loss and damage, and pledges to increase financing all need to be put in action. But it is also a water COP, the first water COP. Let me express my high appreciation to Egypt's COP presidency for highlighting this critical ties between water and climate. Excellencies, the motto of the 77th session of the General Assembly is solutions through solidarity, sustainability, and science. I firmly believe that our thinking, our initiatives, and our actions must all be guided by science-based evidence. Just a few weeks ago in New York, I had a stakeholder consultation attended by over 1,200 scientists, civil society organizations, youth representatives, and many others. Out of these discussions emerged the so-called game changers, which have the potential to transform current policies and sustainable development as a whole. Thanks to science, we have now the toolkit for turning our commitments into reality. And we have now the path from this COP with the UN Water Conference in March, the Sendai midterm review, the SDG Summit in 2023, as well as the Summit on the Future in 2024. So let's ask ourselves, when this conference ends, will this glass be full or half empty? Half full or half empty? This glass will be full when we fulfill our pledges and use the solutions we already have. At this COP, we have already two initiatives which are very important to fill this glass: the FAST initiative and the AWARE initiative. This glass will be full when we overcome procedural debates and can fully focus on how to address transformation to a water and climate-safe development path. So let it be a full glass. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. May I please ask distinguished delegates to remain in your seats to allow our special guests to leave the podium. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I now resume the joint 6th meeting of the Cop27, 6th meeting of the CMP17, and 6th meeting of the CMA4. I would like to remind parties whose head of state or government has already delivered the national statement during the first part of the high-level segment on the 7th and 8th of November to refrain from making another national statement and have the statement posted on the UNFCCC website. As we begin the national statements, I would like to remind representatives of the actions in place to ensure effective time management, namely the 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Please be reminded that statements should be as concise and brief as possible, as full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. Speaking slots for those who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. Distinguished colleagues, let us begin. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ali Salajka, Vice President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. جناب آقای رئیس، دبیر محترم اجرایی، وزرای عالی مقام، همکاران گرامی، خانم‌ها و آقایان، پیش از هر چیز اجازه می‌خواهم با اظهار قدرشناسی و تشکر عمیق خود نسبت به مردم و دولت جمهوری عربی مصر به خاطر میزبانی کاپ 27 کنوانسیون تغییرات آب و هوا در شرم الشیخ و مهمان نوازی نسبت به هیئت اعزامی از کشورم 30مین سالگرد کنوانسیون چاره‌جویی تغییرات آب و هوا را گرامی بداریم. تغییرات اقلیمی چالشی با پیامدهای جدی برای همه کشورهای سراسر جهان است. انعطاف‌پذیری برای کشورهای در حال توسعه کلید موفقیت در زمینه‌های عمده‌ای مانند کاهش انتشار، سازگاری و ظرفیت‌سازی است. یادآوری اصول کنوانسیون به ویژه مسئولیت‌ها و قابلیت‌های متداول اما متمایز CBDR و نیز مسئولیت‌های تاریخی کشورهای توسعه یافته بسیار مهم است. جمهوری اسلامی ایران به مسئولیت‌های مشترک اما متفاوت در قبال ظرفیت‌ها و قابلیت‌های مشترک تأکید می‌نماید، اما بدیهی است کشوری که به ظرفیت‌های بین‌المللی دسترسی کمتری دارد مسئولیت کمتری نیز خواهد داشت. همانطور که استحضار دارید، بر اساس پایش و پیشبینی آخرین گزارش IPCC WGI در نوامبر 2022 در مورد وضعیت آب و هوا از جمله بارش و دما، روند افزایشی رویدادهای حدی جوی مانند بارانهای شدید و امواج گرما تا سال 2100 در آسیای غربی و مرکزی مشاهده می شود. علاوه بر این، مطالعات منطقه‌ای نشان می‌دهد رویدادهای حدی مانند سیل، خشکسالی و طوفان‌های شن و گرد و غبار در بسیاری از نقاط جهان پرتکرار و شدیدتر شده است که تهدیدهای جدی برای سلامت انسان و محیط زیست به شمار می‌روند. خانم‌ها و آقایان، لازم است بر ضرورت داشتن یک رویکرد متعادل تأکید نمایم. تاریخ به ما می‌گوید رویکردهای برد دوام بیشتری دارند. بیایید نگرانی‌های همه طرف‌ها را در نظر بگیریم. رویکردهای مشارکتی در کاهش انتشار و سازگاری با تغییرات آب و هوا باید فراگیر و برای همه مفید باشد. کشورهای توسعه یافته متعهد شدند در کاهش انتشار گازهای گلخانه‌ای پیشگام باشند و از طریق تأمین مالی و همچنین انتقال فناوری به کشورهای در حال توسعه از آنها حمایت کنند. وضعیت ویژه کشورهای در حال توسعه نیاز به بررسی و شناسایی بهتری دارد. ارائه حمایت کافی به موقع و قابل پیشبینی از کشورهای در حال توسعه حیاتی است. ظرفیت سازی در کشورهای در حال توسعه به آنها این امکان را می‌دهد تا مشارکت خود را در مقابله با تغییرات آب و هوایی گسترده‌تر کنند. عالی جنابان، بحران کنونی انرژی در اروپا و سایر مناطق جهان مؤید این است که سیستم انرژی در عین دارا بودن عناصر پایداری از نظر مسائل محیط زیستی باید بر جنبه‌های دیگری از جمله مقرون به صرفه بودن و در دسترس بودن بپردازد. به نظر ما راهبردهای آب و هوایی باید همیشه جامع، متوازن، فراگیر و عادلانه باشد. اتخاذ راهبردهای صرفاً یک یا دو گزینه‌ای و حرکت به سوی یک منبع انرژی واحد منجر به ناپایداری انرژی و فقر بیشتر انرژی می شود. حذف کامل انرژی‌های فسیلی در کوتاه یا میان مدت ناممکن به نظر می رسد. بنابراین سرمایه گذاری و ترویج استفاده از سوخت‌های کم کربن مانند گاز طبیعی و سیستم‌های ساختمانی با بهره‌وری انرژی بالا می تواند نقش مؤثر در تأمین امنیت انرژی و توسعه پایدار داشته باشد. پدیده تروریسم اقتصادی و استفاده از آن به عنوان یک اهرم تهدیدی نوظهور برای توسعه پایدار به شمار می رود. اقدامات قهری اقتصادی غیرقابل توجیه و ناعادلانه‌ای که بر کشور من تحمیل شده است، رفاه و سلامت شهروندان ما را هدف قرار داده است. این قبیل اقدامات دسترسی به منابع مالی و فناوری‌های نوین و ابزار لازم و ضروری جهت برداشتن گام‌های مؤثر ملی در کاهش انتشار و سازگاری و همچنین بهبود کیفیت هوا را محدود کرده است. به علاوه تحریم‌های غیرقانونی و یکجانبه در تضاد آشکار با دستور کار توسعه پایدار جهانی و موافقتنامه‌های چند جانبه مربوطه پیامدهایی فراتر از قلمرو سرزمین ملی ما دارد و در نهایت منجر به گرم شدن کره زمین می‌گردد. با وجود چنین فشارهای غیرقانونی، ایران با همت و تلاش دانشمندان جوان خود گام‌های مهمی برداشته و راه توسعه را به مسیر پایدار توسعه مبدل ساخته است. مایلم بار دیگر تأکید نمایم که تلاش‌های جمعی ما باید در عمل متضمن توسعه پایدار به نفع کشورهای در حال توسعه باشد. ما در قالب اجلاس وزرای منطقه‌ای در تهران در 21 تیر ماه 1401 بر لزوم همکاری‌های سازنده و عملگرایانه در چارچوب همکاری‌های منطقه‌ای تأکید کرده و تصمیم‌های مقتضی را اتخاذ کردیم. در همین راستا جمهوری اسلامی ایران آمادگی خود را برای استمرار مشارکت در فرآیندهای مذاکراتی اعلام می‌دارد. به امید اجرایی نمودن هدف مشترکمان برای حفظ کره زمین. متشکرم. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Fiamma Naomi Matafa, Prime Minister of Samoa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I extend sincere congratulations to you, Mr. President, on your assumption of the presidency of Cop27 and on the work carried out so far. You have Samoa's full support in the successful execution of Egypt's mandate as the president. Mr. President, I have traveled thousands of miles across continents to be here. After a week in this beautiful and historic country, one has a tendency to ask oneself, are we in a better situation than we last met in Glasgow? Have we mustered the courage to make hard and bold decisions in the last few days towards considered actions to mark a positive conclusion for COP27. The optimism in us will it to be so, but reality is saying otherwise. we need to revisit the Glasgow Climate Pact, calling on a strategic presidential decision on sufficient implementation of the package. Samoa and all Pacific states are at the mercy of climate change, and our survival hangs in the rush of the climate hourglass. The major emitters poised for commitment are far too few in number, with lackluster ambition for decent climate action. Still, we welcome those that have set concrete timetables and targets, because the threat to our livelihoods, security, and well-being is ominously real. Mr. President, why is it not possible to apply the same level of urgency of action witnessed for the COVID-19 pandemic to the meeting of the 1.5 degree Celsius promise? The science is clear and irrefutable. We are off target in achieving the Paris Agreement goal. Our focus lies squarely on actions and more actions on the ground. Continuing on the current path means severe consequences for all humankind. We must upscale ambition on climate mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance. Support for climate adaptation measures is of the utmost urgency, and we encourage all countries to develop and upscale their nationally determined contributions to reflect this accordingly. Samoa submitted its enhanced NDCs in July of 2021 and launched its roadmap prioritizing 21 mitigation strategies, targeting high-emitting and important sectors such as energy, tourism, marine, forestry, and agriculture, to accelerate transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy. Scaled-up adaptation efforts involved the development of 43 community integrated management plans, which collectively form the basis of Samoa's national adaptation plan that is community-based and driven. To address and mitigate impacts of climate change, Samoa is continuing its nationwide tree planting campaign, which started with the planting of 3 million trees from 2009 to 2020. Currently, a national campaign has begun to plant a further 3 million trees from 2022 to 2027 to significantly enhance carbon sequestration and carbon stock. We need everyone to walk that extra mile to determine and frame the future trajectory of our planet Earth. Mr. President, increased funding for mitigation and adaptation must be found to ensure achievement of the 1.5 degree Celsius target. Loss and damage must remain firmly on the table as we continue to witness increasing occurrences of severity of climate change impacts everywhere. Currently, the financial burden for loss and damage falls almost entirely on affected countries and not those most responsible for climate change. Arrangements for the Loss and Damage Response Fund must remain a priority for all. Additional finance is critical. The promised 100 billion floor for climate action can no longer be sidelined, as this amount is already inadequate for the challenges that lie ahead. Samoa welcomes the commitments announced by several developed countries to increase their climate finance and lead in the public climate finance domain. But it is time to concretize pledges and commitments already made, or we will be left with empty promises. We must also advance beyond current promised climate finance. And this is achievable if we are serious, committed, and united. Coal use and new coal power plants must end. Fossil fuel subsidies must be phased out and resources be redirected towards mitigation and adaptation efforts. It is not too late to make Cop27 the adaptation and loss and damage COP. Mr. President, we note with apprehension the increase and frequency of natural disasters that continue to devastate countless lives, with Pakistan being the latest reminder. These environmental threats will worsen unless we commit to tangible and effective global actions. Past actions and responses have been fragmented, and the pace of action lacks urgency. Let us seize this moment to demonstrate our common humanity, our collective understanding of the challenges that we must confront together and act accordingly. We cannot afford the further erosion of trust between the developed and developing countries. Mr. President, we are alarmed by the crisis facing our ocean. Its health is under attack from ever-rising temperatures and acidification, marine pollution, ecosystem collapse, and rapid biodiversity loss. International efforts are desperately needed to reverse and improve the plight of our oceans and ecosystems. There is an inseparable bond between the ocean and the lives of our people. It is our home and a cornerstone of our culture and traditions. It provides a range of ecosystem services, anchors food security, nutrition, and decent jobs and livelihoods, protects biodiversity, provides means of maritime transportation, and form an important part of natural and common heritage. As ocean states, we firmly support placing ocean sustainability at the core of SDG 14 and ensure committed financing for ocean action. We must unite to prevent and eliminate marine pollution, including plastics, oil spills, discharge of waste, and nuclear contaminants. Plastic pollution is of serious concern. The magnitude of the crisis is such that we need to reduce, redesign, create demand for recycled content, and put basic infrastructure for collection in place. The Pacific SIDS contribute less than 1.3% of mismanaged plastics pollution in the oceans, in the world's ocean. Yet, we are grossly and disproportionately affected by its impacts. The Second World Ocean Assessment pointed out the highest quantity of floating plastics are found in the South Pacific subtropical Gaia. Mr. President, as the Blue Pacific continent, our islands are committed to fast-track the development of policies to ban the use of single-use plastic bags, plastic and styrofoam packaging. We welcome the decision to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including the marine environment, and building on the lessons learned from the BB&J process on both time and resourcing. As a global industry, shipping is responsible for 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Whilst progress has been achieved in effective environment management, a proactive approach is critical to ensuring sustainable practice. Hence, the resolution against shipping pollution, sponsored by the Republic of the Marshall Islands, must be supported. Samoa welcomes the call for protecting 30% of our global oceans by 2030 and commend the Blue Leaders 30 by 30 campaign. We believe that whilst this target is ambitious, it is achievable if we can well support it with finance, infrastructure, and innovation. Mr. President, sea level rise is of immediate and grave concern. It will impact adversely on food security and nutrition, including what we are entitled to exploit from our maritime zones. Samoa welcomes the ongoing work within UNCLOS and call for the urgent conclusion of negotiations on an internationally legally binding instrument on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdictions. Increased acidification of our ocean is already destroying entire reef ecosystems, which may never be recovered. Reef damage affects fish population, which in turn affects entire fisheries upon which we rely. This is a stark reminder of how interconnected the effects of climate change are with our environments and our daily lives. Population displacement, loss of sovereignty and statehood are consequences of climate change and sea level rise. And we must plan now for the inevitable. Mr. President, what must we do with great urgency? For our oceans, we must promote ocean governance, safeguard marine zones, protect BB&J, and eliminate pollution. Amongst the myriad of prioritized actions includes building resilience and reversing environmental degradation, taking ambitious actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change, addressing the risks of loss and damage, and supporting the sustainable management of natural resources. We must push for access to appropriate technology and to financing to enable developing countries to achieve net zero emissions before 2050. Mr. President, our borders have been closed since the advent of the COVID pandemic. All our Pacific SIDS have prioritized the safety and health of our people over economic considerations. Though a hard decision to take, many of us were able to keep COVID-19 at bay. We call on our development partners to collaborate with us in determining the best recovery strategy that fits our vulnerability and economic potential. Small island developing states simply cannot support their SDGs and at the same time fund core needs on their own. Development cooperation systems must be more responsive to the constantly changing realities and development emergencies we face daily. As the Secretary General strongly argued, no state should have to choose between rebuilding their economy and servicing their debt. Mr. President, small island developing states face complex development challenges that add to our structural vulnerabilities deriving from the smallness and remoteness of our markets and exposure to climate-related shocks. Most SIDS are not eligible for concessional financing once they are classified as middle or high-income countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these structural vulnerabilities and compounded risks. Consequently, the call for an endorsement of a multidimensional vulnerability index will allow for the inclusion of more than just income-based criteria to assess eligibility for concessional finance. This will support SIDS in addressing their high debt burdens, overcome economic shocks, and simultaneously safeguard the progress made on the 2030 Agenda, Paris Agreement, and the Samoa Pathway. Mr. President, Samoa appeals to all our partners to work with us in realizing the timely and effective implementation of the MVI. Fellow leaders, in the coming days of Cop27, as it draws to an end, we have a chance to demonstrate our collective leadership and solidarity to urgent decisions to address outstanding matters before us. Let us make COP27 the turning point in our efforts to once and for all make the rhetoric, history, and the mirages real. Commitment to concrete action now and elevated ambition can save our planet for future generations. We can avoid a climate catastrophe in our children's lifetime. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency. I would like to remind representatives of the actions in place to ensure effective time management, namely the 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Full text of official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Marian Jurečka, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of the Environment of the Czech Republic, and His Excellency Mr. Franz Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission. Your Excellencies, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Ministers, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my thanks to the Egyptian Presidency, His Excellency Sameh Shmikri and his team for hosting this landmark international climate conference. It is really important that after adoption, the whole set of rules to implement the Paris Agreement, we have now turned our joint efforts to the implementation of commitments adopted at past climate conference, in particular in Glasgow conference last year. The latest reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change bring clear evidence of advancing detrimental impacts of climate change. Regardless of country or region we come from, we are already confronted with them in our everyday lives. The signs tell us that the situation is urgent and we must act now. Despite we have collectively taken many measures, these are still not sufficient. We must continue working and speed up international efforts to mitigate the detrimental climate effects and enhance adaptation to climate change. The Czech Republic, as a member of the European Union, understands the fact the energy and security crisis we are currently facing cannot be an excuse for neglecting the climate crisis. As the EU and its member states, we are jointly committed to raise our climate ambition to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, be at less 55% by 2030 and to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Securing this goal requires a complex of fundamental measures in transforming the way we produce and use energy, addressing economic and social implementations, and deploying innovative technology. In the EU, we are working hard on the Fit for 55 package that translates our Paris Agreement commitment into binding laws. Recently, we reached important agreement within the EU on 3 pieces of legislation that introduce new targets for emissions cuts in sectors such as buildings, road transport, agriculture, on waste, CO2 emission for new cars, land use change and forestry. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the negotiation at expert level last week showed that finding solution requires mutual understanding of problems and interest of our partners. Now we, as ministers, must build on the hard work of our experts and repeat the success from Glasgow by a new success from Sharm el-Sheikh. Only that way we can keep our Paris objective alive and real. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Jurečka. Dear President, colleagues, dear friends, the European Union is here to move forward, not backwards. Glasgow gave us sound foundations. Here in Sharm el-Sheikh, we want to set out a path forward. In Glasgow, all of us fought hard to keep 1.5 alive. We now need to implement these plans and help each other to do so. This is the implementation COP. The President has said it many times. It is now time to deliver. In the European Union, we are delivering. Step by step, the European Green Deal is put into action. We have committed to cut our emissions by at least 55% by 2030. The target puts us on track for 1.5. In the past 2 weeks, we have already agreed 3 of the pieces of domestic legislation to get this done. We agreed how to share emission cuts among our member states, to boost our carbon sinks, and to phase out CO2 emitting cars. We're firmly on track to finalise all legislation to deliver our climate target by the end of this year. The current state of play will bring the actual emissions reductions to at least 57%. So I am happy to announce here today that the EU stands ready to update our NDC reflecting this higher ambition. So don't let anybody tell you, here or outside, that the EU is backtracking. Don't let them tell you that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is killing the European Green Deal, that we are in a dash for gas. No, Europe is staying the course. Actually, we're even accelerating. We are saving more energy, investing more in renewables than ever before. Russia's war against Ukraine will end. Ukraine will rise and prosper. The European Green Deal will succeed. The climate crisis is ravaging our planet every day. We need to step up our act. We need to work faster on adaptation. The EU is ready to make progress on the global goal on adaptation. We are ready to address loss and damage, because too many countries cannot shoulder the climate crisis on their own. We need to close the gap on climate finance, including by collectively doubling adaptation finance. Parties that have not delivered need to take responsibility and need to deliver. We need to work with multilateral banks to get the shift of the trillions going. The EU is committed to taking concrete measures to address the gap in loss and damage, including new funding arrangements. But we need to trust each other, launch a well-designed process so that we can end with the best possible result, with the highest benefits and the most value to those that need it most. Tackling climate change will always require multiple solutions, tailored to specific needs. We know that there is no one-size-fits-all response. I hope we can acknowledge this early on and give ourselves the freedom to move forward without trying to answer every question now. Let us build a Sharm el-Sheikh process that takes all of us forward. Thank you.
I thank their Excellencies, and it is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Elion Nodweo, Minister of Environment, Sustainable Development and Ecological Transition of Senegal, who will be speaking on behalf of the Least Developed Countries Group. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur le Président de la Cop27, Monsieur le Secrétaire exécutif de la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. Permettez-moi tout d'abord d'adresser mes vifs remerciements au peuple et au gouvernement égyptien pour la bonne organisation de cette COP, de la mise en œuvre. Mes remerciements s'adressent aussi au secrétariat exécutif de la Convention pour les dispositions prises pour faciliter nos travaux. Il y a 7 ans, jour pour jour, l'accord de Paris a été adopté avec l'espoir que l'action climatique sera à la hauteur de l'objectif qu'on s'était fixé, à savoir maintenir la température du globe à 2 degrés Celsius, voire 1,5 degrés Celsius au cours de ce siècle. Aujourd'hui, force est de constater que le manque d'ambition constaté dans la mise en œuvre des contributions déterminées au niveau national nous rapproche dangereusement des 2 degrés Celsius de réchauffement et même plus. Devant une telle réalité, les pays les moins avancés, qui sont parmi les plus vulnérables au réchauffement climatique, ont de quoi s'inquiéter face à ce défi existentiel. Chaque jour qui passe nous éloigne de la cible de 1,5 degrés Celsius qui risque d'être hors de notre portée sur les émissions mondiales de gaz à effet de serre continuent d'augmenter au rythme actuel. Nous avons donc l'obligation morale de rassurer les milliards de personnes qui nous observent avec des décisions fortes devant nous conduire rapidement vers une transition juste et équitable qui garantit la résilience des écosystèmes naturels et des communautés humaines les plus vulnérables. La mission est certes difficile, mais pas impossible. Notre génération doit avoir le courage et la sagesse d'endosser la responsabilité de changer le cours de l'histoire pour transmettre aux générations futures une planète vivable. Les événements climatiques extrêmes, dont la fréquence et l'ampleur ne cessent d'augmenter, exposent des centaines de millions de personnes à une situation d'insécurité alimentaire chronique et parfois à une migration forcée pour survivre. C'est pourquoi ici à Sharm el-Sheikh, nous devons établir un fonds pour adresser les pertes et dommages dus au changement climatique, opérationnaliser le réseau de Santiago et définir une meilleure gouvernance du mécanisme international de Varsovie sur les pertes et dommages. Les pays les moins avancés ont besoin d'un meilleur accès au financement pour s'inscrire dans une voie de développement sobre en carbone et résiliente au changement climatique. Pour ce faire, des financements nouveaux et additionnels sous forme de subventions sont nécessaires. Il urge aussi de doubler pour l'adaptation comme promis à Glasgow, de mobiliser 40 milliards de dollars d'ici 2025 et de veiller à l'équilibre dans le financement de l'atténuation et de l'adaptation. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, les 3 décennies de mise en œuvre de la Convention des Nations Unies sur le climat qui se sont écoulées ont été émaillées de déceptions. L'absence de leadership et d'ambition en matière d'atténuation des émissions de gaz à effet de serre est inquiétante. Cette déception est aussi valable sur la question des 100 milliards de dollars par an, promis mais jamais mobilisés de manière effective et transparente. Cette COP est donc l'occasion de redorer le blason du processus multilatéral sur le climat en montrant une réelle volonté sur le bilan mondial de l'action climatique. L'objectif mondial en matière d'adaptation et le nouvel objectif collectif quantifié en matière de financement climatique avec un agenda clair de mise en œuvre. L'heure est venue de traduire les 30 années de promesses en action pour faire de la COP27 le catalyseur de la mise en œuvre de l'accord de Paris. Nous devons sortir de cette COP27 avec des résultats à même d'insuffler un nouvel élan de coopération internationale solidaire et dynamique, reposant sur une action climatique renforcée et orientée vers le bien-être de tous les peuples sur une planète mieux préservée. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Tanzila Kamaranova Naryeva, Chairperson of the Senate of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые главы делегаций, дамы и господа. Позвольте искренне приветствовать всех участников саммита и выразить благодарность организаторам, в частности, председателю КОП27, министру иностранных дел Египта господину Самих Шукри и генеральному секретарю Организации Объединенных Наций Антонио Гутерриш за приглашение принять участие в этом важном мероприятии. Мы высоко ценим усилия и инициативы международного сообщества по борьбе с проблемой изменения климата. Убеждены, что только совместными усилиями и сообща мы сможем противостоять этому беспрецедентному вызову современности. Последствия изменения климата остро проявляются и в Центральной Азии. В нашем регионе рост среднегодовых температур воздуха превышает вдвое темпы глобального потепления. Климатические изменения сопровождаются усилением экстремальности погоды, маловодьем, ростом числа пыльных бурь, засоленностью земель, образованием селепаводковых явлений и учащением засух. Наш регион также сталкивается с негативным влиянием высыхания Аральского моря, экологической катастрофой глобального масштаба. Главной целью Узбекистана в этих условиях является достижение экономического прогресса с учетом необходимости снижения уровня выбросов парниковых газов, климатической устойчивости посредством интеграции принципов зеленой экономики в реализуемые структурные реформы. Приоритетом в этом направлении мы избрали низкоуглеродное развитие и ресурсосбережение во всех секторах экономики, внедрение эффективных и экологически чистых технологий. Уважаемые главы делегаций, Узбекистан подтверждает свои обязательства снизить выбросы парниковых газов на единицу ВВП на 35% к 2030 году в рамках Парижского соглашения. Для достижения этих целей по инициативе президента Республики Узбекистан начата реализация масштабных программ по внедрению возобновляемых источников энергии. К 2026 году планируем увеличить долю зеленой энергетики до 8 тысяч мегаватт, что позволит сократить выбросы углекислого газа на 5 миллионов тонн. К 2030 году энергоэффективность экономики планируется повысить вдвое, а долю возобновляемой энергии минимум до 25%. Мы приняли общенациональный проект «Яшель-Макен» «Зеленое пространство», который предусматривает ежегодную высадку 200 миллионов деревьев и кустарников. В результате через 5 лет площадь зеленых насаждений в наших городах увеличится с нынешних 8 до 30%. В целях эффективного использования водных ресурсов в стране осуществляются масштабные реформы с широким внедрением водосберегающих технологий. Узбекистан предпринимает решительные действия для решения проблем, связанных с Аральским кризисом. На осушенном дне Аральского моря за последние 5 лет высажено более 1,7 миллионов гектар лесных насаждений, а к 2026 году этот показатель составит до 2,5 миллионов гектаров или почти 80% территории. Специальной резолюцией Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН регион Приоралья объявлен зоной экологических инноваций и технологий. Надеемся на активное участие партнеров в деятельности многопартнерского трастового фонда ООН по человеческой безопасности для региона Приоралья для решения экологических и социальных проблем нашего региона. Уважаемые друзья, Узбекистан готов к активному сотрудничеству с международным сообществом, направленным на обеспечение безопасного и устойчивого развития, построение климатоустойчивого будущего. Мы выступили с предложением создать региональный климатический совет, который позволит повысить эффективность сотрудничества в продвижении проектов климатической адаптации, борьбы с опустыниванием и деградацией земель, внедрение водосберегающих технологий. Благодарю вас за внимание.
I thank Her Excellency and now welcome His Excellency Mr. Fardat Silba Arsha, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, a very good morning and Swadee Krab. First of all, allow me to begin by congratulating the government of Egypt as they take on the role of Cop27 presidency and extend our sincere appreciation for the hosting of the conference here in spectacular Sharm el-Sheikh. Thailand strongly believes that as the world convenes here in Egypt, we will have a progressive and successful COP. Mr. President, since COP26, Thailand has walked the talk, turning words into actions. We arrive at COP27 with our revised LT-LED with 2050 carbon neutrality and 2065 net zero emission target, as well as an enhanced NDC aiming to reduce 40% of our emission by 2030, of course with international support. Thailand is in the fight against adverse impacts of climate change, just like the rest of the world. The sufficiency economy philosophy pioneered by His late Majesty King Rama IX has been the core guiding principle of the development of our National Adaptation Plan, particularly to promote climate-resilient communities. And moreover, Thailand is actively promoting the bio-circular green economic model. And as a host of APEC, we are optimistic that the Bangkok goals on BCG economy will be the key outcome that helps to synergize cooperation for sustainable growth, climate action, biodiversity conservation, and waste management. Mr. President, no one is spared from climate-induced disasters. In response, we have accelerated our mitigation actions in all sectors. We aim to increase the production of zero-emission vehicles to 30% by 2030. The shares of renewables in electricity generation by at least 50% by 2050, and support the commercialization of carbon dioxide removal technologies before 2040. We are also promoting substitutions in cement and cooling industries and piloting on alternative rice farming technique. We also aim to increase our forest area to 55% to boost our carbon sink by 2037. And meanwhile, to explore the cooperative approaches, Thailand has prepared the national guidelines and mechanisms on carbon credit management. And we are one of the world's first countries to practice ITMOs under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, Thailand firmly believes that we have gathered here to do more than just talk. We need actions on all fronts, and we do need it now. And I truly believe in humanity to consciously and collectively define our future. I am confident that working together, we will be able to fight against this common enemy we ourselves created. And only together, ladies and gentlemen, shall the impossible become possible. Thank you very much. Khop kun krap.
I thank Your Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Bonkam Vorashiet, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, on behalf of the delegations of Lao PDR, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to the government of Arab Republic of Egypt for its able presidency and excellent hosting of this meaningful COP27. Mr. President, having recognized the importance of combating climate change, the government of Lao PDR has been working attentively with relevant international organizations, development partners, and all relevant stakeholders, including young generation, to develop informed and sound climate change policies, including updated national climate change strategy towards 2030, updated national determined contribution 21 to 25, and mainstreaming climate change adaptation and mitigations measures into financing strategy for the 9th National Socio-Economic Development Plans 21 to 2025. Currently, we are working on forestry carbon sequestration, clean energy, clean industry, electric mobility, circular economy, and carbon financing instruments. All of these strategy and action could help Lao PDR to pursue its path to decouple greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth and to achieve net zero emission by 2050. To this end, there is pressing need for adequate financial resources, technical support for gaining access to climate finance and other sources of funding to support our country as LDC, LLDC, to achieve development goals and commitments made under the Paris Agreement. In this regard, we call for living a political will coupled with concrete outcome of measures taken by international community during this COP27 to preserve our only one planet for our generation to come. At the same time, I call upon other development partners and donor countries to fulfill their commitments to good faith in this regard. Mr. President, let me conclude by reaffirming the government of Lao PDR firm commitment to the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to combating climate change. Take this opportunity, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to their international community for continued support and assistance to the Lao PDR for our efforts towards climate change adaptation and mitigation. Thank you. Khop chai lai lai.
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Josephine Napon Cosmos Ngoya, Minister of Environment and Forestry of South Sudan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, honorable ministers, heads of delegation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to convey to you the greetings and well wishes of the President of the Republic of South Sudan, Salva Kiir Mayardit, who is unable to attend this COP because of some pressing issues back home. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the people and government of Egypt for the excellent hospitality accorded to my delegation. Mr. President, though with negligible emissions, the climate crisis is worsening in my country, South Sudan. 8 out of 10 states in South Sudan are currently flooded, and over 2 million people are internally displaced and have lost their livelihoods. Besides the flooding, droughts, excessive heat waves, haphazard rain patterns have resulted in crop failure, thus impacting the livelihoods of our people. Over 60% of our people are now categorized as food insecure. Therefore, life-saving interventions are needed urgently. Hence, the prospect of climate-induced displacement and climate refugees will become a new normal. To address the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and pollution, South Sudan, besides its ambitious second nationally determined contributions, NDC, and its first national adaptation plan, and the national biodiversity strategy and action plan, is currently developing a cost-effective nature-based solutions to address the recurring droughts, floods, land degradation, deforestation, crop failure, and biodiversity loss. Mr. President, our environment requires us to change our attitudes and embark on ambitious nature-based solutions by actively protecting, sustainably managing, and restoring degraded ecosystems that are source of our food, water, energy, wealth, and livelihoods. As a region most affected by the impacts of climate change, South Sudan would like to underscore the importance of adaptation. A balance between mitigation and adaptation has to be adapted. Therefore, 50% of the funds raised has to be earmarked for adaptation projects. On climate finance, South Sudan believes that the $100 billion that was arbitrarily set is no longer sufficient. This amount is to be revised upwards. We therefore appeal to the developed countries to fulfill their pledges and to avail the necessary funds for adaptation projects. On the emission gaps, it is abundantly clear that we are falling behind to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We therefore appeal to all parties that have not submitted their NDCs to do so urgently for the developed countries' parties to drastically cut their emissions such that we keep the 1.5 degrees and goal alive. On loss and damage, South Sudan would like to see into it that all outstanding issues regarding the establishment of the loss and damage fund are to be resolved in this COP. Last but not least, I wish to affirm the political will and commitment of the government of the Republic of South Sudan in implementing the outcomes of the COP27. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Joel Clark, Minister of Sustainable Development, Environment, Climate Action, and Constituency Empowerment of St. Kitts and Nevis. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Presidents, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, I am honored to join you at this critical event, the most prominent stage for climate action. Mr. President, St. Kitts and Nevis lends its voice to the plight of small island developing states to support transparent, robust, actionable pathways to address climate change impacts on lives and livelihoods. We have arrived here equipped with climate science that has never been clearer. To use a phrase coined by the ICDF Taiwan, science enables action, which informs each of our appropriate and practical steps to address climate vulnerabilities. There are countries that do not have the financial resources and sufficient human capital to respond to or even become fully conscious of the potential ravaging effects of climate change. Mr. President, there is no region in the world, however, that can escape the climate change experience. But what we do know is that the experience is devastating. Our survival is severely threatened, particularly as SIDS. In my country, climate events disrupt the livelihoods of families whose incomes depend on tourism or agriculture. In many cases, it is a single mother, a taxi driver, a farmer, the elderly who are most affected. This is a vicious cycle of climate hazards. We lose lives, income scarcity, scarcity of food and water, problems with health and wellness, higher costs of living, and the disruption of our families. The glaring fragility of our small state is magnified by our climate experiences. The severity of loss and damage is traumatic. What then is the game changer? There is no action without addressing climate justice, which embraces climate finance, a perennial challenge of SIDS. We must start by acknowledging the vast differences in the economies of scale and fiscal inability to respond to such climate events, as well as the problems of classifications as a middle-income country based solely on GDP. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have embarked on a journey of green possibilities. Our goal is to become a sustainable island state. Our energies are currently focused on harnessing geothermal energy. Our 39-year-old friendship with the Republic of China, Taiwan, has supported our renewable energy pathway. Together, we have produced 2.5 megawatts of renewable energy for our citizens. Taiwan has partnered with many countries to reduce emissions. We here proclaim that Cop27 is one of action and implementation and has been branded Together for Implementation. Mr. President, St. Kitts and Nevis highly recommends that the Republic of China, Taiwan become observers. Your serious consideration will be highly appreciated. In particular, we have in St. Kitts and Nevis an invitation to sing one song. This is a song penned by our renowned calypsonian who happens to be our Minister of Energy. Are we waiting blindly for 2030? Together, we should sing one song for the fight for climate action, climate justice, and climate finance. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Essa Sharon Morna Niu, Minister of Natural Resources of Niue. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, fellow small island developing states, and especially Niue's Pacific family, I stand before you today to amplify our voice to the many issues that have been made on this podium over the last 10 days and many years before. I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors, beating and echoing the drums for our survival, for our future and the generations yet to come. The drum beats are getting louder, with greater urgency for action. Cop27 is an implementation COP. Let's make it happen. Let's turn those drum beats from our islands to be sounds of celebrations, sounds of action, and not sounds of despair. We call for timely access to climate finance, delivered through modalities with the least amount of transaction cost and commensurate with our absorptive capacity. These are the sounds that we seek, and we look to you, our partners, to join our journey. Let's honor the drumbeats by availing those climate funds promised to us. Expedite their release so we can address loss and damage, and streams of program activities set out for execution and work in unity to reach a common goal. Niue have done everything that we possibly can to access climate finance to help us mitigate and adapt. There are large disparities in accessing climate finance. This is an unacceptable situation for island countries whose existence is under threat. Niue continues to take bold steps with a new innovative solution. We do this because we simply do not have the time to navigate the camel's eye, to find the passcode, to unlock the elusive treasure chest. We have developed a homegrown, innovative solution to raise funds for climate adaptation and mitigation, using our blue ocean and through our commitments on ocean conservation and protection. This is a world-first environment and non-financial instrument called Ocean Conservation Unit. Our objective is to establish a new and ocean-wide trust fund that can provide a consistent funding stream to help our climate mitigation and adaptation priorities. The funding mechanism is scalable and replicable. Our goal is to raise at least $32 million to capitalize our trust fund and making available $1.5 million annually for 20 years. The $32 million is based on the aggregated cost of protecting and maintaining 1 square kilometer of the Moana Mahu Marine Protected Area, comprising 40% of Niue's EEZ, or 127,000 square kilometers. As a champion for social inclusion and gender, I am reminded of the realities women and girls face every day, from experiencing domestic violence, bearing the unburden of unpaid work, to barriers limiting their economic empowerment and participation in public life. And if this isn't enough, they, with other marginalized communities, have to deal with the disproportionate impacts of climate change. I urge all of us to include women, girls, children, youth, persons with disabilities in all our decision-making and actions. Our Pacific leaders have endorsed our 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to guide our journey as one strong, secure, inclusive, resilient Blue Pacific, ensuring a future that we can be proud to leave behind for our grandchildren, the mokupunas of Moana Nui. Let's drown out the cries of despair and calm the beating hearts of fear from our kids and our vulnerable communities, assuring them that all will be okay. Let's change the drumbeats to action, innovative and sounds of joy. It starts with us as world leaders.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Habib, Minister of Sustainable Development, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of Belize. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, allow me to convey greetings on behalf of Prime Minister John Briceño and the government and people of Belize. I also extend my delegation's appreciation to the government of Egypt for being such gracious hosts. I arrived at Sharm el-Sheikh with a heavy heart after witnessing the devastation caused by Hurricane Lisa in Belize, leaving our old capital devastated. Initial assessments reveal an approximate $100 million in physical and social damages, with a total of 500 homes lost or extensively damaged. 5,000 persons were in shelters and had to be housed and fed. Losses of this singular event are estimated at about 10% of our national budget, not accounting for ripple effects, including social and health impacts. Monies that could otherwise be used for health, for education, and poverty alleviation. Unfortunately, such catastrophe is just a testament to the impacts of the climate emergency, which regrettably is a forerunner of a new hostile global climate regime of our own making. Mr. President, this COP is an implementation COP. We need action. Where are those actions? In how many COPs have we been arguing for urgent climate action? And how many more do we need to have? How many lives do we need to sacrifice to solve the biggest crisis we face in our civilization? Belize joins other nations in expressing its profound sympathies to the people of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Canada, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and the United States of America, who have been devastated by the passage of Hurricane Julia, Ian, and Fiona, which were described as some of the strongest Atlantic hurricanes in modern record. Lives were lost and livelihoods upended. Hurricane Fiona caused flooding, destruction of residential housing, and infrastructural damage all across Belize due to heavy torrential rains and strong winds. Small island developing states such as Belize continue to be severely impacted by climate change across all sectors. SIDS continue to face natural, health-related, social, and economic shocks that are beyond domestic control. The growing vulnerability of SIDS is a direct consequence of being in climate-sensitive zones and are especially prone to the destructive impacts of climate change, with damage costing approximated $12.6 billion per annum. Losses due to natural hazards exceed an average of $46 million per year in Belize. Even in the face of these challenges, Belize continues to implement targeted actions to mitigate and to help our people to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Belize's updated NDC shows a 5% increase in overall commitment. UNFCCC synthesis reports on NDCs show that even if all unconditional and conditional nationally determined contributions, the combined pledges of 193 parties of the Paris Agreement would put the world on track for achieving 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. Such a scenario will inevitably lead to overshoot of the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal, resulting in irreversible impacts on SIDS. This would necessitate making drastic and unprecedented emission cuts across all sectors. We join the call for the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We need stronger commitments and actions from the G20 and other large polluters. We need to keep 1.5 alive. Mr. President, urgent actions need to be implemented for the reduction of emissions from critical sectors such as energy, transport, forest, waste, and agriculture. Belize continues to prioritize its critical forest resource with effective policies, strategies, and meaningful actions, resulting in a national forest cover of over 60%. As we endeavor to build our current efforts, market-based approaches become increasingly important if we are to achieve the further emission cuts committed in our NDC. As climate change mitigation falls short, discussion on averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change becomes urgent. In his speech a few days ago, President Biden spoke of climate justice and reiterated that no one should be left behind. Mr. President, Taiwan, as the world's 21st largest economy, should be afforded the opportunity to share its technologies, resources, and expertise with the world in addressing climate change. Therefore, the government of Belize supports Taiwan and calls for its professional, pragmatic, and constructive participation in the UNFCCC. Mr. President, progress has been slow over the years, but at Cop27, we have a make-or-break opportunity to get on track. Climate action and the provision of support to those in need must be given top priority. The world is depending on us, and we cannot let them down. Please be assured of Belize's support for a successful climate change conference here in Egypt. And in President Biden's words, let us write a better story for the world. And I say, there is no better legacy we can leave for our future generation. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Savawares Dottir, Minister of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries of the Iceland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the science is clear. Recently, new reports, there among publications from the IPCC and the UNEP, all state the same scientific evidence, the stark reality of climate change. We are already seeing shocking extreme weather events around the globe. We see extensive water shortages from shrinking glaciers and snowpack, global sea level rise from ice sheet and glacier loss, wildfires, floods, and landslides. But these are just a mild prelude to the catastrophes ahead if we do not act now and act fast. Tomorrow, Iceland and Chile will launch an initiative called Ambition on Melting Ice, where at least 18 countries have confirmed their willingness to join. The initiative has a clear goal to protect the frozen areas on our Earth through vigorous climate action. It is not only a matter for mountain and polar nations alone, it is a matter of urgent global concern. All of us need to make it a priority to reduce emission. This is a matter of urgency. As a part of this important path, the Icelandic government has decided not to issue any licenses for oil exploration in Iceland's exclusive economic zone. Further, the Icelandic government will propose to Parliament to ban all oil exploration within the economic zone of Iceland. Ladies and gentlemen, the science tells us that the changes will be vastly greater if we don't manage to keep warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius. This fact alone should inspire us to cut emissions. Iceland has set itself an ambitious independent national target of a 55% reduction in emissions, for which Iceland is directly responsible for by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. Iceland also participates in reaching a 55% reduction target in emission with Norway and the European Union. Iceland emphasizes that we must keep the goal on 1.5 centigrades alive, but as it stands, we are heading the wrong way. While we need to lower our emissions to resist climate change, we also need to adapt to those changes already occurring and that will magnify in the future. Adaptation is an increasingly important issue for Iceland, both domestically and internationally. Iceland has increased contributions to international climate finances with special emphasis on adaptation and will continue to do so. Among Iceland's biggest threats from climate change are ocean acidification, melting ice, both glaciers and permafrost, sea level rise, and changes in precipitation. This affects ecosystems and biodiversity on which we base our societies. Iceland underscores the importance of building adaptation measures on scientific grounds and the best possible information available with the broad participation of stakeholders and local communities. Food systems are an example of the transboundary implications, as many countries are reliant on products from multiple parts of the world. Iceland is an example of this, with geographical setting in the middle of the North Atlantic and reliant on imported food and supplies for food production. Ladies and gentlemen, knowing that, here is the place where we can really make changes. Let's be those who are and will be remembered for taking responsibility, be brave, and let's be the catalyst of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Hassan Abdullah, Minister of Environment of Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I present the statement of His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and the Chairman, Conference of Head of States and Government of Pan-African Great Green Wall. Mr. President, on behalf of Nigeria and its delegation, I congratulate you on your election as the President of the 27th session of the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and assure you of Nigeria's full support as you lead our deliberations. At COP26, I did say that for Nigeria, climate change is not about the perils of tomorrow, but what is happening today. Today, Nigeria is currently grappling with devastating effects of terrible flooding, which has affected 3.2 million persons. Over 600 lives lost, over 100,000 persons displaced, and over 300 hectares of farmlands destroyed. Nigeria, and indeed the rest of Africa, from the Sahara to the Cape, is living with increasing fear of food insecurity as a result of the floods. The economic cost for loss and damage for Africa is estimated at almost United States dollars 2 trillion, excluding non-economic losses. Developed nations must not ignore the demand from developing nations to establish a loss and damage finance facility to help developing nations recover from the adverse effects of climate change, particularly the devastating floods, worsening desertification, and rising sea levels. At COP26 in Glasgow, I announced Nigeria's commitment to net zero by 2060 on the basis of a detailed energy transition plan. This plan, the first of its kind in Africa, highlights the significant scale of resources required to attain both development and climate ambitions by 2060. However, the public finance urgently needed to fund energy transitions and climate action is lacking, a situation compounded by debt distress affecting many low and middle-income countries. We are therefore taking bold steps to pioneer innovative climate finance instruments, such as debt for climate swaps, and championing the development of the African Carbon Market Initiative. In support of this, Nigeria has enacted the Climate Change Law, alongside the initial governance framework, and launched the Nigeria Emission Trading Scheme. To signal investment readiness, we have made significant progress in creating the enabling policies and incentives to advance a short list of priority projects, including renewable solar independent power plant, scaled decentralized renewable energy projects, and gas-fired commercialization opportunities, to name a few. We are hopeful that investors and the global community will recognize the immense investment opportunities and potential for support. Mr. President, as the largest economy in Africa, we are engaging the G7 to request the inclusion of Nigeria in the G7's climate partnership list for the co-creation of a just energy transition partnership. Nigeria and the rest of Africa call for an effective and sustainable framework that will address the socio-economic effects of energy transition, including energy poverty, loss of jobs and livelihoods. Finally, Africa contributes about 3% to the global emissions, but is left to cope with the devastating impacts of climate change. Nigeria has spearheaded initiatives aimed at recovering degraded land, forces in Sahara and the Sahel, such as the Great Green Wall. There is a dire need to expand existing adaptation acceleration programs for developing countries. I thank you for listening to me, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Montoya, Minister of Science, Technology and the Environment of Cuba. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Buenos días, señor presidente, excelencias, distinguidas ministras y ministros. Esta COP tiene la particularidad de realizarse en África, uno de los continentes más ricos en biodiversidad y en un complejo contexto internacional. El tiempo para adoptar las decisiones y acciones necesarias para revertir el cambio climático se nos acaba. Lo que hagamos tiene que ser consecuente con la historia y no olvidar que las raíces de este problema están en el sistema capitalista, responsable de un modelo de desarrollo depredador y consumista. Lo que está ocurriendo tiene un impacto en la ética y la estética global. Se deteriora la calidad de vida del hombre, su entorno e infraestructuras. En todas partes del mundo, a consecuencia de eventos meteorológicos extremos, fallecen personas, se destruyen ciudades, tradiciones, se afecta la memoria histórica, la seguridad alimentaria y energética de las naciones, lo cual daña la psicología de las personas. Cada año en mi país vivimos la incertidumbre de saber si seremos azotados por un huracán, fuertes lluvias o intensas sequías. Estas vulnerabilidades se ven agravadas por el cruel e injusto bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero de los Estados Unidos de América, que ha sido rechazado ya durante 30 ocasiones por la comunidad internacional y aún permanece inamovible. No obstante, Cuba continúa avanzando en la experiencia de 5 años de implementación y resultados del Plan de Estado para el enfrentamiento al cambio climático Tarea Vida. Uno de ellos es la creación de la Fundación Climática IRIS Unidos por el Clima, que ponemos a su disposición para canalizar esfuerzos nacionales y regionales. Estimados ministras y ministros, lo que está en juego es el desarrollo sostenible, la erradicación de la pobreza y la subsistencia del hombre. Le debemos a las futuras generaciones el compromiso de actuar, de lograr una gobernanza y ética climática abierta basada en la solidaridad y justicia financiera. La solidaridad climática es dejar de actuar por intereses económicos individuales, es pensar en los que pierden condiciones de vida, es cambiar patrones insostenibles de consumo, es actuar y ayudar a los más vulnerables. La justicia financiera es disponer de nuevos y adicionales fondos para resarcir las pérdidas y daños e implementar las medidas de adaptación que necesitamos, simplificar procedimientos y acordar una nueva meta financiera. Concluyo recordando el discurso del líder histórico de la Revolución Cubana, Fidel Castro Ruz, en Río 92, que por su vigencia, cito, una importante especie biológica está en riesgo de desaparecer, el hombre. Hay que distribuir mejor las riquezas y tecnologías disponibles en el planeta, menos lujo y menos despilfarro para que haya menos pobreza y menos hambre. Cesen los egoísmos, cesen los hegemonismos, cese la insensibilidad, cese la irresponsabilidad y el engaño. Mañana será demasiado tarde para hacer lo que debimos haber hecho hace mucho tiempo. Fin de la cita. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Murat Kurum, Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change of Turkey. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Sayın Başkan, Sayın Bakanlar, kıymetli katılımcılar, sizleri saygıyla selamlıyorum. 27. Taraflar Konferansı toplantılarında alınan kararların ortak evimiz dünyanın ve insanlığın geleceği adına hayırlı sonuçlar getirmesini diliyorum. Bugün bir araya gelmemizin temel sebebi iklim değişikliğiyle mücadele. 1,5 derece hedefini erişilebilir kılmaktır. Paris Anlaşması'nı uygulamak artık bir tercih değil, tüm ülkeler için bir zaruriyettir. Bu anlamda hepimiz etkin politikalar üreterek ülkelerimizdeki yeşil dönüşümü başarılı bir şekilde gerçekleştirmek zorundayız. Cumhuriyetimizin 100. yılına girerken Cumhurbaşkanımızın ortaya koyduğu Türkiye Yüzyılı vizyonumuz doğrultusunda ülkemizin 2053 net sıfır emisyon hedefiyle yine iklim değişikliğiyle mücadelemizde yeni bir dönemi başlatmış bulunuyoruz. Yeşil alan miktarının arttırılmasından doğa koruma projelerine, yenilenebilir enerjiden altyapı çalışmalarına, sürdürülebilir belediyecilikten her açıdan kendi kendine yeten şehirler hedefiyle enerjisini israf etmeyen, engelsiz, erişilebilir şehirler kurmak için çalışıyoruz. Çevre, insan ve doğayı merkeze alan, dünyaya ve insanlığa yeni form ve yorumlarla sunduğumuz Türkiye Yüzyılı'nın muhteşem Türk şehirleriyle amacımız hiç kimseyi ve hiçbir yeri geride bırakmamak. Saygıdeğer misafirler, bu önemli çalışmalarımızın neticesinde iki önemli kararımızı sizlerle paylaşmak istiyorum. Birincisi, iklim değişikliğiyle mücadelede önemli bir referans olacak Türkiye'nin ulusal katkı beyanını katılımcı ve şeffaf bir anlayışla tüm kurumlarımız ve özel sektörle istişare ederek bilimsel bir yaklaşımla hazırladık. Ekonomi genelinde 7 emisyon azaltım sektörünü ve uyum bileşenini içeren belgemizi bir öncekinden daha iddialı hedeflerle ülkemizin yeşil dönüşümünü gerçekleştirecek 2053 net sıfır emisyon hedefimize uygun olarak güncelledik. Bu kapsamda Türkiye olarak 2030 yılı için %21 olarak açıkladığımız artıştan azaltım hedefimizi %41'e yükseltiyoruz. Böylece ülke olarak 2030 yılı için yaklaşık 500 milyon ton emisyon azaltımı yapmış olacağız. İkinci olarak en geç 2038 yılında emisyonlarımızı tepe noktasına ulaştıracak ve net sıfır emisyon hedefimize güçlü politikalarımızla ilerlemeye devam edeceğiz. Ayrıca ulusal katkı beyanımız uyum kapsamında öngördüğümüz politikaları da içermektedir. Enerjiden sanayiye, ulaştırmadan binalara, atık sektöründen yutak alanlara kadar tüm sektörlerimize ilişkin iklimle alakalı her alanda dönüşüm süreçlerini yaşayacağız. Öncelikle 2023'ün Mart ayında yollarda olacak Türkiye'nin yerli ve milli otomobili TOG'un ülkemizin ve dünyanın yeşil dönüşümüne önemli katkılar sağlayacağına inanıyoruz. Saygıdeğer Emine Erdoğan hanımefendinin himayelerinde yürüttüğümüz sıfır atık hareketiyle iklim değişikliğiyle mücadeleye katkı sağlıyoruz. Türkiye ile Birleşmiş Milletler arasında imzalanan küresel sıfır atık iyi niyet beyanı ile bu hareket artık küresel bir çevre seferberliğine dönüşmüştür. Bu çabaların tüm ülkeler ve uluslararası platformlar tarafından desteklenmesi ortak evimiz dünyanın geleceği için elzemdir. Türkiye'nin yeşil dönüşümünü gerçekleştirmek için bir diğer önemli adımımız da iklim değişikliği kanunu taslağının meclisimizde yasalaşmasıdır. Türkiye çıkaracağı iklim kanunuyla iklim değişikliğiyle mücadelesinde çok daha etkin ve kararlı adımlar atacaktır. Değerli katılımcılar, Türkiye çevre ve iklim politikalarını hayata geçirme noktasında güçlü ve öncü ülkelerden biridir. Ev sahipliğini yaptığımız G20 Dünya İnsani Zirvesi Akdeniz'i korumak için gerçekleştirilen COP22 ve Birleşmiş Milletler Habitat toplantıları gibi pek çok uluslararası toplantının başarılı bir şekilde gerçekleştirilmesini sağladık. Ve sahip olduğumuz bilgi ve tecrübeler doğrultusunda 2026 yılında yapılacak 31. Taraflar Konferansı'na Türkiye olarak ev sahipliği yapmayı arzu ediyoruz. Sizlerin de desteğiyle Türkiye'de yapılacak toplantılarla iklim politikalarının geliştirilmesine uluslararası düzeyde katkı sağlayacağımıza inanıyoruz. Sözlerime son verirken dost ve kardeş ülke Pakistan'da yaşanan sel felaketinden hemen sonraya bölgeye gittiğimizde suyun gidebileceği hiçbir yerin kalmadığına üzülerek şahit olduk. Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'ın her platformda ifade ettiği gibi daha adil bir dünyanın var olabileceğine inancımızda uluslararası işbirliğimizi ve dayanışmamızı arttırmak ve kimseyi geride bırakmamak en temel vazifemiz olmalıdır. Bugün Pakistan'ın yaşadığı afet hepimizin ülkelerinde yaşanabilir. Bu anlamda kayıp ve hasar konusunun her zaman gündemde tutulması ve en kırılgan ülkelerin sesinin duyulması bu toplantıya katılan herkesin üzerinde vicdani bir sorumluluktur. Bu duygularla sizlerle bir araya gelmekten duyduğum memnuniyeti bir kez daha ifade ediyor. Konferans başkanlığını yürüten Mısır Arap Cumhuriyeti hükümetine sıcak ev sahipliği ve başarılı organizasyonu için teşekkür ediyor. Hepinize saygılar sunuyorum.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Jadabo, Minister of Climate Change and National Resilience of Nauru. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by thanking the government of Egypt for their hard work and preparation for COP27. I would also like to thank the people of Egypt for their warm welcome to their beautiful and historical country. Mr. President, this is, of course, the 27th Conference of the Parties. 27 years of negotiating. 27 years of decision, all directed at one purpose, clearly expressed in the Convention, and that is to prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. Mr. President, I hope you would agree that we are well past dangerous. I would rattle off the list of impacts on vulnerable countries like my own, but you have heard them all before. You will likely hear several variations of that same list throughout the day. We have all heard them many, many times for the past 27 years. For 27 years, small island nations have made appeals to our common humanity, to our shared values. We have placed our full trust in Western experts who have pushed false solutions and urged us to compromise for the good of the process. We have allowed ourselves to become props in environmental campaigns. Aspiring international celebrities have launched entire career on the back of our projected demise. It is hard to conclude that this strategy has been anything but a failure. The decision makers, those with real powers, simply do not care. They do not care about the communities that will be displaced and destroyed. They do not care about the food and water shortages that ravage poor countries. All they care about is power, pure and simple. And they are willing to use all the tools at their disposal to maintain that power, regardless of the consequences to countries like mine. How do we know this? We have seen what happens when their security, when their wealth and their power are threatened. They will move heaven and earth to protect their perceived interests. It does not matter if it takes money or sanctions or bombs. The rest of us are merely collateral damage. It is long past time that we recognize this reality and start behaving accordingly. This is normally the point in a statement where I would pivot to a more inspirational message about our collective power, the power of youth, the power of science, and the power of solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to do that today because I do not want to insult your intelligence, and quite frankly, I'm not in the mood. Ultimately, I can only speak credibly about the power of my country and whether or not we will use that power to protect my people. We can no longer let this process obstruct or distract from our responsibility to protect the people. Climate change is no longer a prospective danger to be avoided. It is a clear and present danger that will only grow for decades to come. For Nauru, climate change is an issue of national security. And as an issue of national security, we must forge alliances that protect our national security, not based on some vaguely worded promises about a distant future, but based on material outcomes in the here and now, material outcomes on the ground in Nauru. I would like to recognize the contributions of Taiwan to both my country's development and to the fight against climate change globally, and urge parties and the Secretariat to agree on an appropriate arrangement for their professional, pragmatic, constructive participation in the UNFCCC and its associated mechanisms. Mr. President, I do believe we are approaching the point at which the major powers will mobilize to address the impacts of climate change. The impacts are reaching a level that is destabilizing, even for them. We may even see it within the next 27 years. Last question I have for you, Mr. President, is how will they respond? Will they respond with money? Will they respond with sanctions? Will they respond with bombs? Or will they finally recognize that climate change can only be solved through true global solidarity? I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Faleh Nasser Al Thani, Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Qatar. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيد الرئيس، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني بداية أن أتقدم بخالص الشكر والتقدير لجمهورية مصر العربية على استضافتها لهذه الدورة الهامة لمؤتمر الأطراف في اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ. ولا يفوتني أن أشكر أمانة اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ وجميع القائمين على هذا المؤتمر. كما أود أن أغتنم هذه المناسبة لأشكر سعادة السيدة باتريسيا سبينوسا على ما بذلته من جهود خلال فترة عملها. ونتوجه بالتهنئة لسعادة السيد سايمون ستيل على توليه منصب الأمين التنفيذي للاتفاقية، ونتمنى له التوفيق والسداد. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، ينعقد هذا المؤتمر في مرحلة مهمة من مراحل التعامل مع ظاهرة التغير المناخي، حيث نأمل أن يكون دافعاً قوياً لتعزيز العمل الجماعي والبناء على مخرجات المؤتمرات السابقة التي تضمنت العديد من المحطات الهامة، والتي كان منها مؤتمر الأطراف 18 الذي انعقد في دولة قطر في 2012. وذلك في إشارة واضحة منا على عزمنا القوي لمواجهة هذا التحدي العالمي والذي جعلنا ضمن أولوياتنا استجابة لرؤية قطر الوطنية 2030 التي رسمت لنا خارطة طريق، حددت توجهات المستقبلية وعكست طموحاتنا نحو تحقيق نمو متوازن مستدام ضمن وسط تفاعلي، سعيا إلى تعزيز الجانب الثقافي لدى أفراد المجتمع باعتباره محور التنمية. وفي هذا الإطار وإيمانا منا بأهمية البحث العلمي في مواجهة تحديات التغير المناخي والاستدامة، استثمرت طاقتنا في إنشاء العديد من المراكز البحثية والتي أثمرت على الكثير من الإنجازات والمشاريع البحثية الرامية لتعزيز الجانب المعرفي وتقديم المشورة وبناء القدرات في المجالات ذات الصلة بالتغير المناخي والاستدامة البيئية. هذا إلى جانب جهودنا لضمان خوض الطلاب في هذه المرحلة الهامة من حياتهم تجربة التعايش في بيئة تعليمية ترتكز على مبادئ الاستدامة بالشكل الذي يرسخ مفاهيم الاستدامة البيئية لدى طلابنا على المدى الطويل. السيدات والسادة، سعينا لتحقيق أهداف الاستراتيجية الوطنية للبيئة والتغير المناخي في دولة قطر، تم وضع خطة وطنية للتغير المناخي تهدف إلى تخفيف انبعاثات الغازات الدفيئة بنسبة 25% من جميع القطاعات بحلول 2030، حيث حددنا في هذه الخطة الوطنية مئات المبادرات سواء للحد من الانبعاثات أو للتكيف مع آثار التغير المناخي. وإلى جانب ذلك فإن معالم تقدمنا في مجال الطاقة المتجددة باتت واضحة، حيث افتتحنا مؤخرا محطة للطاقة الشمسية ستلبي ما يبلغ 10% من احتياجات دولة قطر من الطاقة الكهربائية بما يعادل 800 ميجا وات. هذا بالإضافة إلى نيتنا توسع في مجال تحويل النفايات إلى طاقة كجزء من برامجنا الوطنية للاستدامة والموارد وإعادة تدوير النفايات. الحضور الكرام، إن قيام دولة قطر بتقديم مساهماتها المحددة وطنيا يعكس مستوى الطموح الذي تسعى إلى إحرازه في مجال التغير المناخي، وستواصل دولة قطر العمل من أجل ترجمة هذه الطموحات إلى واقع سيساهم بلا شك في دعم أهداف اتفاق باريس بشأن التغير المناخي. في الختام أود أن أغتنم هذه الفرصة للترحيب بالجميع لحضور بطولة كأس العالم لكرة القدم التي ستستضيفها دولة قطر بعد بضعة أيام، وذلك للاستمتاع بأول بطولة كأس العالم محايدة للكربون. وأنا أتمنى كذلك بالنسبة لهذا المؤتمر أن يحقق الأهداف المرجوة منه وأن ننطلق منه بعزم أكبر لمجابهة التغير المناخي وتحدياته. شكرا جزيلا.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Fernando Andres Lopez Larrenaga, Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente, Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, muchas gracias a la República Árabe de Egipto por organizar y ser los anfitriones de esta 27ª Conferencia de las Partes. Represento a El Salvador, una pequeña nación de América Central reconocida por sus volcanes, por su café, por sus olas de clase mundial que son excelentes para practicar el surf, pero también somos conocidos porque nos encontramos, según IPCC, entre los 20 países con mayores impactos causados por eventos climáticos. La realidad del cambio climático en El Salvador es enfrentarnos a sequías extremas y fenómenos hidrometeorológicos cada vez más extremos y cada vez más frecuentes. Estos fenómenos nos llegan desde el Océano Pacífico y desde el Océano Atlántico. Estos fenómenos frenan nuestro desarrollo, generan pérdidas económicas, pueden llegar a ocasionar también la pérdida de vidas humanas y amenazan nuestra seguridad hídrica. Esta vez estamos levantando la mano porque somos uno de los países más afectados ante los efectos del cambio climático y porque ya estamos contribuyendo con todas las propuestas, pero necesitamos muchísima ayuda para lograrlo. Hemos desarrollado muchas acciones para asegurar la gestión estratégica de la adaptación y la mitigación al cambio climático. Hemos presentado nuestras NDCs dando cumplimiento al Acuerdo de París y a los lineamientos de esta convención. La acción climática requiere un trabajo extenso y la participación de todos los sectores. Hemos desarrollado nuestra política nacional de medio ambiente, nuestro plan nacional de cambio climático. Todo esto va enmarcado en esta estrategia baja de desarrollo en carbono. Hemos priorizado el sector afolo, el sector agrícola, y estamos planificando llegar a la carbono neutralidad en ese sector. Trabajamos en temas claves también como el financiamiento climático, los incentivos, compensaciones ambientales. Estamos implementando nuestra nueva ley de recurso hídrico, nuestro reglamento integral de residuos y fomento al reciclaje y nuestra política nacional energética 2020-2050. El Salvador cumple con todo lo que está dentro de sus fronteras. El país está cambiando. Hemos pasado de tener más de 20 homicidios diarios en las administraciones pasadas a ser el país más seguro de Latinoamérica. Los números están claros y la opinión de los ciudadanos también. Ahora es tiempo que actuemos todos. Además de la amenaza climática, enfrentamos amenazas que ponen en riesgo nuestros ecosistemas, la salud, la vida y la soberanía nacional. Tenemos proyectos mineros cerca de nuestras fronteras que atentan contra nuestros ecosistemas y nuestra soberanía. Hacemos el llamado a la solidaridad, a la cordura y a las buenas prácticas. Debemos unirnos todos en este compromiso global ante el cambio climático, porque los rigores de este ya golpean a nuestra población que pierde sus bienes materiales y pone en riesgo su vida. Esa es la realidad con la que el cambio climático golpea a los salvadoreños y a millones de ciudadanos de todo el mundo. De esta reunión en la que estamos presentes deben surgir acuerdos y soluciones concretas para los cambios que se necesitan en países como los nuestros, que con pocos recursos enfrenta una amenaza tan grande. También hacemos el llamado a los países emisores para cumplir sus compromisos climáticos y sean consistentes con la ambición que se requiere para llegar a los objetivos del Acuerdo de París. No solamente deben limitar sus emisiones, sino también brindar la provisión de financiamiento nuevo y adicional para abordar la adaptación, las pérdidas y daños causadas por el cambio climático. Estamos perdiendo vidas humanas, patrimonio natural y patrimonio cultural. No les estoy hablando como funcionario, les estoy hablando como un ciudadano, parte de los más de 7 millones de salvadoreños. Actuemos, ejecutemos acciones claras, concretas. Nuestras naciones están en riesgo. El Salvador es un país pequeño, pero dispuesto a hacer grandes cambios. Gracias.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Christopher Bowen, Minister of Climate Change and Energy of Australia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Inyagai Minakoi, Ubalinga Yamulis, Australia Pa. That means I have the privilege of speaking to you on behalf of Australia in one of the languages of the people of the Torres Strait, the islands that run to the northeast of our country. The people of the Torres Strait have inhabited their lands for 70,000 years. For them, for our brothers and sisters in the Pacific family, for our farmers paying the price of climate change, for Australians facing ever-increasing risk of flood and bushfire, for everyone around the world facing natural disasters that are increasingly unnatural, Australia is acting. And for them, the world must act. Australia is back as a constructive, positive and willing climate collaborator. One of our first acts on coming to government was to increase our emissions reduction target to 43% by 2030 in our nationally determined contribution and to enshrine that law in the law of the land. Within this decade, 82% of Australia's energy supply will be renewable. The future of energy is renewable, not just for Australia, but it must be for the world. And it's urgent that we accelerate the renewables transformation this decade. Such a transformation is both a challenge and an opportunity, but mostly it is fundamentally necessary if we are to have any hope of success in mitigating climate change. That's why it's so important we send the message from this COP, loud and clear, We remain committed to last year's commitment to hold the world as close as possible to 1.5 degrees of warming, and that we must embrace a faster and more orderly transition to renewable energy as part of these efforts. The cost of letting these priorities fall to the wayside is too great. Climate change is the primary economic and security challenge for our region and an existential threat to the blue Pacific continent. That's why we're boosting assistance to the region with an additional $900 million to support the Pacific family's development and resilience in dealing with the climate emergency. And that's why, along with Pacific nations, we are seeking to host Cop31 in 2026. Pacific voices have led this debate for decades and they must be heard. Unfortunately, we know the story of our region, the story that we will tell if the world fails to act. From island communities facing the fight for their existence to towns and cities battling ever more frequent bushfires and floods. Our co-hosting will seek to accelerate global action and harness the economic opportunities of the clean energy transition. While Australia has increased our ambition, we know there is much more to do. That's why, just as this COP is focusing on ambition and implementation, Australia's government is focusing on real emissions reductions as well, through our $20 billion fund to transform our energy grid and many other policies. Because while we talk about the risks of climate change, we also need to think about the immense economic opportunities that come with action. And Australia wants to be a renewable energy superpower. In coming weeks, I'll be delivering Australia's first annual climate change statement to our Parliament, a comprehensive and transparent stocktake of how we're tracking against our NDCs and how we'll make further progress. Because the urgency with which we must act requires frank conversations about where we are now, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. Collectively, we now have just 85 months to achieve our 2030 targets. We all know this is the critical decade, and that means national action, but it also means multilateral action, and action by every single one of our institutions. Our international financial architecture was built for a different time and different challenges. Some of our financial institutions are stepping up to this task, our most important global job, but others are not. Just as we commit to this agenda as individual nations, our multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, must be wholeheartedly committed to this task from their purpose and their actions. We have a moral imperative and a driving need for our institutions to work with countries across the developed and developing world, not only to reduce emissions, but to respond to a changing climate and its economic impact on nations. That will mean increasing the proportion of funding spent on climate, but also ensuring that such funding doesn't saddle developing countries with unsustainable debt. This fight cannot be done by one nation. All emitters, past, present and future, have a responsibility to act. We must drive an inclusive climate agenda. I reaffirm Australia's commitment to ambitious and necessary change and pledge to be a strong and constructive partner along the way. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Sean Audrey Edward, Minister of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology and Vocational Training of St. Lucia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I bring you warm greetings from the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Philip J. Pierre, and the government and people of St. Lucia. Permit me to place on the record St. Lucia's gratitude to the government and people of Egypt for their warmth and hospitality as host of COP27. Mr. President, Excellencies, fellow delegates, like my colleagues from the Caribbean, I have traveled half the circumference of the globe to be here against the prevailing perception of most citizens of our small island developing states who hold the view that COP can best be described as an academic exercise of talk and inaction because of its failure over the years to deliver concrete solutions to their climate-related problems they did not create. Mr. President, an implementation COP, this is what COP27 is meant to be. Prior to departing my country a few days ago to be here, I witnessed firsthand the destruction caused by a weather system which affected the northern part of our 238 square mile island. In the space of 3 hours, heavy rainfall led to the destruction of homes, businesses, vehicles, schools, and other vital infrastructure. Within that short period, millions of dollars of damage was recorded. Mr. President, St. Lucia and other small island developing states are living the horrific effects of climate change on a daily basis, a situation we did not create but are unjustly being made to pay for. The governments of SEEDS continue to experience a growing debt burden, forced to borrow beyond prudential limits to respond to the effects of climate change. This cycle of debt exacerbates the already debilitating fiscal position of SEEDS and hinders our ability to not only treat with the issues of climate change, but also provide basic necessities to our people. When will developed countries deliver on their promises to double adaptation finance towards making meaningful advances on our decisions in support of the upcoming global goal on adaptation? When will we break the constant talk cycle by delivering on our promises to scale up adaptation grant finance and agree on a decision at Cop27 that will go beyond simply supporting the development of national adaptation plans and provide support for their actual implementation? When will major emitters stop the backpedaling, where they commit to small gains in clean energy initiatives on one hand, while simultaneously multiplying their investments and profits in fossil fuels on the other hand? We, the people of St. Lucia, suffer the consequences of this hypocrisy. Mr. President, delegates, let us put people first. Addressing climate change requires a collaborative effort, one which transcends the boundaries of race, religion, geography, gender, political status, or even economic circumstances. A nation like Taiwan, though not recognized by the United Nations and its subsidiaries as a bona fide state, also has to contend with climate change, yet it is denied a seat at the negotiating table, despite Taiwan's demonstrated commitment to fighting climate change domestically and in the developing world. The government and people of St. Lucia are grateful to the government and people of Taiwan for their unwavering support of our adaptation and mitigation efforts. Today, Mr. President, St. Lucia and the rest of the Caribbean call on world leaders, fellow delegates, and stakeholders to truly make this COP27 the implementation COP it is touted to be. Developed countries and agencies that are, whether by deliberate bureaucratic means or otherwise, impeding access to pledge billions of dollars to developing countries for climate adaptation, must demonstrate greater sensitivity and honor their obligations to SEEDS. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Dato Abdul Manaf Metusini, Minister of Primary Resources and Tourism of Brunei Darussalam. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the world is not on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. Science has shown that the effects of climate change has repercussions on the planet, as well as the people's life and prosperity. More severe impacts are in store if we fail to immediately scale up adaptations efforts and cut global greenhouse gas emission by half in this decade. The after effects of the global pandemic and the current landscape of the macro environment have generated effects that have rendered climate change efforts to be to be deprioritized for the sake of economic recovery. This means that the outlook for future generations remains uncertain. Alhamdulillah, despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, Brunei Darussalam remains committed to delivering our climate change goals, guided by our national vision, Wawasan Brunei 2035, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Brunei Darussalam, even though 72% of our land area is covered with forests, and is able to absorb 97% of our domestic greenhouse gas emissions, as a coastal country on the equator, we are not exempted from the effects of the climate crisis. Mean temperatures and rainfalls have been increasing, and if no effort is undertaken, key strategic areas in the country could be underwater as early as 2050. While our action so far has been successful in implementing climate change initiatives, there is still room for improvement. On this note, Mr. President, I would like to share 4 points drawing from our experiences. First, strong collaboration between the government and energy sector is essential. The reliance on the oil and gas industry is a crucial challenge for Brunei Darussalam in combating climate change. It requires concerted efforts to balance economic security and climate actions. On this note, together with the energy industry, we have stepped up efforts in driving energy transition and facilitating our climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. Second, a robust monitoring mechanism is crucial to meet the net zero target. Brunei Darussalam announced a high ambition to move towards net zero by 2050 through just transition and forest preservation. Without accurate data and proper monitoring in place, we will not be able to have an emission baseline and verified inventory of our natural sink. As such, Brunei Darussalam plans to launch a mandatory reporting directive with the objective to enhance the transparency of our emissions reporting and further help to substantiate our action to achieve our net zero ambition. Third, resource mobilization is required to accelerate mitigation and adaptation efforts. This is one of the current action aligned with the Brunei National Climate Change Policy launch in 2020. While we are meeting some of the targets set out by the policy, such as the year-on-year reduction in industrial emissions, the increased deployment of small-scale solar, as well as our reforestation and afforestation effort, some enablers for the adoption of new technologies also need to be put in place. I'm pleased to share that in April this year, the government of Brunei Darussalam signed a memorandum of understanding with the Bank Islam Brunei Darussalam to provide climate financing amounting to $2 billion to ensure that we meet our national determined contribution target of a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emission against business as usual level. Last but not least, adaptation is undeniably crucial. To increase adaptation measures and future-proof our country and communities, we are now in the progress of developing a national adaptation plan to coordinate adaptation efforts to make Brunei Darussalam a climate resilient and adaptive nation. Mr. President and esteemed guests, the task ahead of us is not easy, but it is necessary. We must not waste the opportunity the climate crisis offers. There is a massive potential to unlock green growth and green jobs through the deployment and upscaling of new technologies to tackle the issues we are currently facing. And we can achieve this faster if we can work together. Brunei Darussalam is also proud to share that the ASEAN Center for Climate Change will be located in Brunei Darussalam once established. Although our country only contributes to about 0.017% of the global greenhouse emission, we believe our small action can lead to big impacts. So let's advance together in implementation. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Simo Kilepa Minister for Environment, Conservation and Climate Change of Papua New Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Papua New Guinea has the honor to speak on behalf of the coalition of rainforest nations. At the outset, we allied ourselves with a statement made by Pakistan on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Mr. President, as the latest IPCC study indicated, the effects of climate change are much more severe than anybody have ever imagined. Achieving the 1.5-degree threshold as defined by the IPCC is therefore a must, and Cop27 must deliver. Mr. President, let's be clear. The 1.5-degree goal is unattainable without REDD+ and full consideration of the world's rainforests. Dramatically slowing global deforestation is needed, and the REDD+ mechanism is singularly designed to achieve that goal. Article 5 of the Paris Agreement defines REDD+ as the only mechanism to implement forestry activities. Whether it is deforestation, degradation, or conservation, REDD+ is our North Star. It is based on a set of decisions that have been agreed and are now being implemented. Developing countries are now hard at work on Article 5, which should not be reopened. Our work to date should not be disrupted. It is now for corporates and governments to support verified UNFCCC REDD+ results when seeking to achieve net zero. Paris Agreement compliant sovereign carbon is the only standard that keeps 1.5 degrees possible. Mr. President, environmental integrity must be at the core of our work, and the COP27 outcome must be built on these principles. REDD+ decisions already ensure a high level of environmental integrity, and with other sectors should be based on the same rules, notably national GHG inventories and national reference levels. The same stringency should be reflected in Article 6 guidance, as this is a critical condition for the private sector to engage with the Paris Agreement. The elements of the enhanced transparency framework created by the Paris Agreement must include clear and simple decisions that are consistent with previous agreed rules. Emission reductions or removals not included in our NDC's national monitoring system and GHG inventories must not qualify for international transfer. Mr. President, rainforest nations have already delivered more than 90 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. This is an astounding figure and proof that REDD+ mechanism has been of immediate benefit. These actions deserve to be adequately rewarded so that we can continue to effectively address the global climate emergency. For this reason, we reinforce the reality that REDD+ results are internationally transferred mitigation options for 2021 and beyond. As Article 6.2 is a critical tool allowing countries to fulfill their NDCs, it should include incentives for early pre-2020 REDD+ actions and should only include activities within their respective NDCs. REDD+ is part of Paris Agreement. The CDM is part of the past. REDD+ countries also need credit for early action. Mr. President, adaptation is of utmost importance of our countries. We must agree on a clear plan to define the global goal on adaptation. Adaptation finance should not be a small percentage of mitigation. It should be a real at scale. Finance for adaptation projects should come exclusively from developed countries. Mr. President, we have all made sacrifices to attend COP27. It is therefore imperative that we respect all views and engage all parties to find success. As usual, you can count on us and our support to deliver what is needed, what the world is expecting. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity in my national capacity to mention that Papua New Guinea's recent greenhouse gas inventory results have shown that Papua New Guinea has achieved net zero emissions mainly because of the implementation of the national REDD+ strategy. We are willing to do more as per our enhanced NDC and implementation plan. We are also in the process of finalizing our national adaptation plan. But as a small island developing state, we would like to request the developed countries to meet their commitment under the Convention of Paris Agreement in providing financial and technical support to us to implement our enhanced NDC as well as our national adaptation plan. Such support should be easily accessible. Papua New Guinea also supports the call from AOCs and Group of 77 and China that under your presidency in this COP, an arrangement should be made to establish an operating entity of the UNFCCC financial mechanism focused on addressing loss and damage in line with outlined function of COP27 to the design and further operationalization of the operating entity no later than COP29. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Conrad Hunt, Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, in 2017, the islands of Antigua and Barbuda were shattered by hurricanes Irma, then Maria. Damage totaled $136 million, with the tourism sector accounting for 44%. I witnessed the evacuation of my people from the entire island of Barbuda. What was a temporary measure dragged on, and some people never returned home. Climate and weather extremes are increasingly driving displacement in all regions, but especially in small island developing states. So concluded this year's climate science report of the IPCC. But Mr. President, what we are witnessing is a gaming of the system. Countries come here to this COP and make grand statements. Some are even funded by the very industry that we are here to phase out. The lackluster follow-up through could not be a clearer signal, as you can see. They are only concerned with keeping the fossil fuel industry as profitable as possible and as long as possible. And in the same minute, the whole issue of keeping 1.5 alive becomes an elusive dream. The system is being gamed at our expense as small island developing states and the expense of future generations. Antigua and Barbuda is here to declare that the gaming cannot continue, no longer. I call on the Secretary General of the United Nations to convene world leaders, major fossil fuel companies, to implore them to direct percentage of their profits to capitalize a climate insurance fund for loss and damage. This COP must establish a funding arrangement for loss and damage. As we see the inaction of many developed countries, the potential to stall talks and land a devastating blow for us as small island developing states is looming. But Antigua and Barbuda will not leave here without a loss and damage fund. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gerson Elias Barrios Garrido, Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of Guatemala. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente, Excelencias, distinguida audiencia, Guatemala es un país megadiverso y multicultural. Es aún uno de los 20 países más diversos que resguardan junto a estos más del 70% de la diversidad biológica en el planeta, pero que constantemente está afectado por los efectos del cambio climático. De manera que estos efectos no solo ponen en peligro el patrimonio natural de Guatemala, sino el de toda la humanidad. Mi país, de acuerdo con el reporte del IPCC, ha sido identificado como uno de los 15 países más vulnerables en el mundo. De acuerdo a esta evidencia científica, contribuimos apenas con el 0.07 de las emisiones globales de gases de efecto invernadero. Según informes nacionales de la Secretaría General de Planificación de nuestro país y reportes internacionales de CEPAL, BID y Banco Mundial, han cuantificado las pérdidas económicas totales ocasionadas por los fenómenos hidrometeorológicos, los cuales ascienden a millones de dólares, obligando a centrar los recursos económicos en la recuperación y reconstrucción de infraestructura, además de la pérdida de biodiversidad, de los efectos socioeconómicos, la pérdida de los medios de vida de aproximadamente 2.5 millones de personas y la destrucción de cultivos, lo que incrementa tanto la inseguridad alimentaria como la migración forzada por los efectos del cambio climático y en ocasiones la pérdida de vidas humanas. En ese sentido, requerimos de manera urgente el apoyo y acceso a fuentes de financiamiento climático internacionales ágiles y efectivas, que permitan incrementar la implementación de acciones de mitigación y adaptación con el fin de reducir la vulnerabilidad e incrementar la resiliencia de la población al cambio climático. Guatemala quiere reiterar la petición realizada a la Organización de las Naciones Unidas y a la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático para que reconozca la alta vulnerabilidad de América Latina y el Caribe y la declare como una de las regiones más afectadas en el mundo por los efectos del cambio climático. Seguimos impulsando en nuestro país el modelo de concesiones forestales en la Reserva de la Biosfera Maya en el departamento del Petén, mediante el cual las comunidades protegen el bosque y gestionan los recursos de manera sostenible, impulsando la inclusión de mujeres en este proceso y aprovechando el conocimiento ancestral de nuestros pueblos indígenas. Hemos incrementado la cobertura forestal. En 2020 teníamos 250,000 hectáreas de concesiones forestales y en 2022, 2 años después, la meta fue duplicada, 550,000 hectáreas, más del doble de lo que se ha hecho en 27 años en nuestro país. Esto nos ha permitido incrementar nuestra cobertura forestal y disminuir y manejar de mejor forma los incendios forestales. Otra de nuestras prioridades seguirá siendo el manejo del recurso hídrico que se ve afectados por los efectos del cambio climático. Aprovecho la oportunidad para hacer una mención especial al gobierno de Taiwán, país amigo que ha contribuido en el desarrollo de proyectos para fortalecer las medidas de adaptación y mitigación en Guatemala y en el mundo, por lo que instamos a que se apoye su participación en la Convención y el Acuerdo de París para que pueda así sumarse a la lucha contra el cambio climático. Finalizo reiterando el compromiso de mi país, el cual se suma a los esfuerzos internacionales, y hago un llamado urgente a impulsar la acción colectiva para afrontar esta coyuntura climática sin precedentes. Vamos juntos por la implementación. Muchas gracias.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Bhupender Yadav, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, let me first express our gratitude to our hosts and the presidency of Cop27, the Arab Republic of Egypt, for their tremendous efforts and gracious hospitality. A year ago, at Glasgow, we responded to call of science and came forward with important pledges and commitment. This year, at Sharm el-Sheikh is our moment of action, and the presidency of Egypt has rightfully designated this as the COP of implementation. Excellencies, our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, announced India's aim of achieving net zero emission by 2070 at Glasgow. Within 1 year, India has submitted its long-term low emissions growth strategy indicating low carbon transition pathways in key economic sectors, responding to the call for increased ambition in our 2030 climate targets. India updated its NDC in August 2022. We have embarked our far-reaching new initiatives in renewable energy, e-mobility, ethanol-blended fuels, and green hydrogen as an alternate energy sources. We also seek to foster strong international cooperation through action and solution-oriented coalitions like International Solar Alliance and Coalition of Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, both of which are launched and nurtured by India. This is a testimony of our ethos of collective action for global good. India, home to 1.3 billion people, is undertaking this arduous effort despite the reality that our contribution to the world's cumulative emission so far is less than 4%, and our annual per capita emission are about 1/3 of the global average. At the heart of India's vision of a safe planet is a one-word mantra, Vasudev lifestyle for environment, the Prime Minister Modi set forth in our national statement at COP26. Mission Life was launched by Prime Minister Modi in presence of the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, on 20th October 2022. The world urgently needs a paradigm shift from mindless and destructive consumption to mindful and deliberate utilization. We are trustees of this planet Earth. We must nurture it through sustainable lifestyles and optimize resource use and minimize waste. As the world's most populous democracy and a vibrant emerging economy, India seeks to lead by example and invites the global community to be a part of Mission Life for individual, family, and community-based actions. Excellencies, India is assuming the presidency of G20 in 2023 with the motto of Vasudev Kutumbakam, means one earth, one family, one future. Our journey toward a planet safe for humanity, it is one that no nation can undertake alone. This is a collective journey to be undertaken with equity and climate justice as our guiding principles. We hope that the fight against climate change will unite the world as one family. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wilbert Rosas Beltran, Minister of the Environment of Peru. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Estimado presidente, distinguidas autoridades, permítanme saludar en quechua, uno de los idiomas andinos y amazónicos que tenemos en el Perú. Ancha munasqa huayqepanaykuna, sumaqpuncha y kachunqankunapaq, kaypi hunullanasqa kashanchis, llipin chay sasachaku y cambio climático sutichasqa, chay ch'uyanchananchispaq. Chaytan kunanpuncha y lluy llaqtakuna huñunasqa ch'uyanchasun. Hermanos y hermanas del Perú y de todo el mundo, y que hoy nos exigen una respuesta ante el cambio climático. Reciban el saludo del señor Presidente de la República, Pedro Castillo Terrones, con quien compartimos nuestra gratitud por la oportunidad de expresar el compromiso del país y por atender con sentido de urgencia y ambición la emergencia climática que hemos declarado en nuestro país para este año. La adaptación y la mitigación al cambio climático son clave para garantizar el bienestar de toda la humanidad y un elemento prioritario para que el Perú alcance su meta de ser un país con un desarrollo sostenible e inclusivo. Para lograrlo, estamos trabajando hacia una economía resiliente y de baja en carbono, donde seamos capaces de reducir nuestra vulnerabilidad, poner en valor nuestro bosque en pie y evitar la deglaciación de nuestras cordilleras e impulsar una transición energética hacia energías renovables. Por ello, hoy comparto las prioridades de la respuesta peruana al cambio climático para hacer de esta una de las mejores oportunidades del desarrollo. En primer lugar, nuestros bosques y los pueblos indígenas. Estamos comprometidos en atender las necesidades de los pueblos indígenas. En ese sentido, promoveremos el diseño y la implementación de la red más indígena amazónica, que nos permitirá la conservación productiva de los bosques y que se implementarán gracias a que somos el primer país que cuenta en su gobernanza con una plataforma de los pueblos indígenas para enfrentar el cambio climático. En segundo lugar, nuestra acción climática, que reúne a todos y todas los actores del país, conscientes de la importancia de establecer lineamientos e incentivos para que el sector privado participe en esta tarea, y estamos priorizando la puesta en marcha del Registro Nacional de Medidas de Mitigación, RENAMI. Por esta razón, el Perú propone un trabajo coordinado a través del intercambio sur-sur, que nos permita fortalecer la integridad ambiental y promover la inversión privada que incorpore salvaguardas sociales y ambientales. En tercer lugar, la ciencia como base de la acción climática. Para ello, el Perú contará con un observatorio de conocimiento científico sobre el campo climático y específicamente sobre el cambio climático, a fin de fortalecer el acceso, uso y divulgación de la información científica climática generada a nivel nacional e internacional que permita tomar decisiones efectivas. Finalmente, nuestra estrategia nacional frente al cambio climático con una mirada al 2050. La razón de ser de esta acción climática en nuestro país es su gente, por lo cual nuestro futuro estrategia y a largo plazo es nuestra juventud, que en esta cumbre ha sido representada participando un equipo nacional de negociaciones como parte del compromiso de poner al centro de nuestros objetivos el bienestar de las personas y de la juventud. Por todo ello, concluyo invitándolos a renovar sus compromisos climáticos con acciones concretas y ambiciosas. Solo así podremos afirmar que la Cop27 fue el encuentro anual más importante para la acción climática que obtuvo decisiones exitosas en beneficio de nuestros pueblos. Muchas gracias.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Hussein Makhlouf, Minister of Local Administration and Environment of the Syrian Arab Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
السيد رئيس المؤتمر، السادة أصحاب المعالي، السيدات والسادة الحضور، أتقدم بالشكر العميق لرئاسة المؤتمر ولجمهورية مصر العربية على استضافة هذا المؤتمر الهام في وقت يشهد فيه العالم متغيرات وظروف قاسية على كافة الصعد، وتزيد من شدتها الكوارث البيئية الناتجة عن التغير المناخي، ولا بد من مواجهة آثارها السلبية على كوكبنا ومتابعة الجهود المبذولة في هذا الإطار. لقد شملت التغييرات المناخية سوريا كغيرها من الدول، وتتمثل بتراجع الهطولات المطرية، وإن حصلت فبشدات عالية غير مألوفة، وارتفاع درجات الحرارة، وبروز العواصف الغبارية الرملية، لتضاف إلى النتائج الخطيرة التي أفرزتها الحرب الإرهابية التي شنت على بلادي وعلى البيئة بشكل خاص. فلم يعد خافياً على أحد التلوث الكبير الناجم عن الاستيلاء على خطوط وآبار النفط وحرقها والتكرير بالطرق البدائية العشوائية من قبل الجماعات الإرهابية والانفصالية المدعومة من الاحتلال الأمريكي. كما أدت الإجراءات القسرية أحادية الجانب التي تفرضها بعض الدول الغربية على الشعب السوري إلى توقف تنفيذ العديد من المشاريع الهادفة إلى حماية البيئة والتنمية المستدامة، وأعاقت نقل التكنولوجيا الصديقة للبيئة، وذلك إما بسبب صعوبات في الاستيراد المواد والمعدات أو عدم التمكن من تحويل الأموال اللازمة لذلك. ولا ننسى ما يقوم به الاحتلال التركي الداعم للعصابات الإرهابية من قطع مياه الشرب عن محافظة الحسكة وتعطيش وحرمان مئات الآلاف من أبناء شعبنا، وكذلك قيامه بتخفيض غزارة نهر الفرات إلى أدنى المستويات وحرمان المواطنين والمزارعين في سوريا والعراق من سقاية محاصيلهم الزراعية، ما أثر على أوضاعهم الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والزراعية والحياتية، بما في ذلك الأثر الكبير على البيئة وعلى التنوع الحيوي والموائل الطبيعية، ناهيك عن اقتلاعه الممنهج لأشجار الزيتون المعمرة ونقلها إلى خارج سوريا، وحرق الغابات في تخريب وتدمير للبيئة وللزراعة وللإنسان. وكذلك ما يقوم به الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في الجولان السوري المحتل من ممارسات على البشر والأرض والمياه والنبات والحجر، واقتلاع أشجار التفاح والكرز وهدم المنازل ودفن النفايات الخطرة، مما ينطوي على كارثة بيئية في هذه المنطقة، إضافة إلى السيطرة على المياه وحرمان المواطنين العرب السوريين منها، حيث لا ينال المواطن السوري في الجولان إلا أقل من 20% من حاجته السنوية من المياه بشكل يتنافى مع القوانين الدولية. إن الجمهورية العربية السورية كانت ولا زالت ملتزمة بالاتفاقات البيئية الدولية التي صادقت عليها، ووضعت ضمن سياساتها وأولوياتها وخططها السنوية إجراءات عدة للحد من آثار تغير المناخ والتوجه نحو التنمية المستدامة، منها اعتماد وثيقة المساهمات المحددة وطنياً ضمن اتفاق باريس، اعتماد البرنامج الوطني للتغيرات المناخية في سوريا وخطط التكيف مع تغير المناخ، إحداث صندوق التخفيف من آثار الجفاف والكوارث الطبيعية بهدف التعويض عن المتضررين من الجفاف، اعتماد الاستراتيجية الوطنية للتحول نحو الطاقات المتجددة، وتم إحداث صندوق الطاقات المتجددة بهدف منح القروض الميسرة للمواطنين والفعاليات الاقتصادية لتشجيع التحول للطاقة المتجددة، تشجيع الاستثمار في توليد الطاقة من النفايات الصلبة، زيادة المناطق الحراجية من خلال خطط التشجير السنوية وزيادة مساحاتها وخاصة المتضررة منها عمدا بفعل الإرهاب، اعتماد المعايير البيئية ضمن خطط الحكومة لإعادة الإعمار للمنشآت المتضررة نتيجة الإرهاب وإزالة الأنقاض والعمل على تدويرها. ونحتاج دعم صناديق المناخ لتمويل المشاريع المحددة وطنياً. السادة الحضور، لم تتمكن سوريا حتى الآن من تقديم بلاغها الوطني الثاني حول التغيرات المناخية بسبب قيام الجهات المانحة بحجب التمويل المخصص لذلك استجابة للإجراءات القسرية المفروضة عليها. لذلك نؤكد على موضوع توفير التمويل اللازم من خلال الصناديق الدولية العاملة في مجال البيئة مثل صندوق المناخ الأخضر وصندوق التكيف ومرفق البيئة العالمي، بما يضمن دعم الدول النامية في إنجاز المساهمات وتنفيذاً للاتفاقيات البيئية الدولية واتفاقية التغيرات المناخية بشكل خاص. تحتاج سوريا في المرحلة القادمة إلى دعم دولي لتجاوز الوضع البيئي المتدهور كي تستطيع مع دول العالم مواجهة تحدي التغير المناخي، فمواجهة هذا التحدي تتطلب إجراءات عدة، منها العمل والتعاضد ما بين الدول المتقدمة والنامية، وإيفاء الدول المتقدمة لتعهداتها والتزاماتها المالية في القمم السابقة للمناخ، وزيادة قدرة الدول النامية كافة على تسهيل الوصول للموارد المتاحة دون تمييز لأي اعتبارات أخرى، ودعم الدول التي تعاني من الإرهاب والاحتلال، العمل سويا لمكافحة الإرهاب وتحقيق استقرار الشعوب لما له من أثر في دعم برامج التكيف والتخفيف من آثار المناخ، نقل وتوطين التكنولوجيا الأنظف للدول النامية كافة دون استثناء، إيقاف الإجراءات القسرية أحادية الجانب على سوريا التي ساهمت في التدهور البيئي وقدرة سوريا على مكافحة تغيرات المناخ، وكذلك إيقاف مبدأ العقوبات الجماعية على الشعوب والدول كافة. في الختام، نأمل دعم المجتمع الدولي دولاً ومنظمات لجهود الدولة السورية في تسهيل العودة الطوعية والآمنة للسوريين من الخارج، وقد حققنا 5 ملايين من عادوا إلى منازلهم وقراهم يعملون اليوم في بناء بلدهم وزراعة حقولهم ويساهمون في جهود تحقيق التنمية المتوازنة والمستدامة. كلمة أخيرة، باعتبار أننا في قمة التنفيذ فإننا نؤكد على الحاجة اليوم إلى آلية أكثر دقة وعدالة لرصد وتقييم وتتبع تنفيذ المساهمات الوطنية، سواء للتخفيف من قبل الدول المتقدمة الأكثر تسبباً للانبعاثات ومدى التزامها بالتخفيض وتقديم تعهداتها بالالتزامات المالية بما في ذلك التعويض عن الأضرار والخسائر، أو التكيف من الدول النامية المتأثرة بالتغيرات ونتساءل معها عن العوائق ونتساعد معها على إزالتها، وبهذا نكون أكثر تعاوناً وتكاملاً واقتراباً من الهدف. نتمنى لهذا المؤتمر أن يساهم في تعزيز وتضافر جهودنا لصنع مستقبل آمن وبيئة نظيفة لأجيالنا القادمة وتحقيق الازدهار لشعوبنا وبلداننا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Grace Fu, Minister of Sustainability and the Environment of Singapore. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, we are at a crossroad. There is a risk that parties may focus on the many pressing issues of the day and lose sight of the war on the climate crisis. This is why COP27 is pivotal. Our choices today will determine our future. Singapore calls for commitment, implementation, and partnerships for decisive global action in this decade to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. First, commitment. Singapore has strengthened our long-term LEDs to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and updated our 2030 NDC to reduce our emissions to 60 million tons after peaking earlier than what we had previously committed to. Our ambitious targets are contingent on the maturity of decarbonization technologies and effective international cooperation, and depend on the continued international commitment by parties. Parties must deliver real emission reductions and demonstrate this by fulfilling their reporting obligations under the enhanced transparency framework. Singapore has acted by submitting our 5th biannual update report, 5th national communications, and 1st adaptation communication. Second, implementation. Singapore's targets are backed by concrete plans and policies. We have legislated to raise our carbon tax, developed a national hydrogen strategy as a major decarbonization pathway to net zero. We are also boosting food resilience through innovative production technologies and pushing boundaries to make our new towns more climate resilient. Lastly, we need partnerships in climate action. Situated in Southeast Asia, collaboration can catalyze the decarbonization of the region. Singapore plans to import up to 4 gigawatts of low-carbon electricity by 2035, and the pilot Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore power integration project can be a pathfinder for a low-carbon ASEAN power grid. Nature-based solutions offer opportunities for mitigation and adaptation, with win-win partnerships under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. At COP27, We are pleased to be joining coalitions including the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, Green Shipping Challenge, Egypt's Aware on Water Security, and UN's Early Warning for All initiative. But most of all, multilateralism, including the UNFCCC, remains crucial for the just and inclusive transition. We must work together towards our agreed goals for a greener planet. Global standards and tariff-free trade are essential to scale green technology and products. The world's largest emitters should lead the transition collaboratively. To support one another by building capacities, Singapore will launch a new 3-year sustainability action package to help build capacity and capability among fellow developing countries. Colleagues, now is the time to act. Let us answer the Cop27 presidency's call to work together for implementation. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Karine James, Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy of Grenada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, distinguished representatives from various delegations, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the government and people of Grenada, let me begin by expressing my appreciation to the Egyptian government for the kind hospitalities provided to my delegation and I in facilitating our attendance here at COP27. Mr. President, when I arrived here this morning, I was struck by the fact that many agenda items remain unresolved. And I want to emphasize at the outset that there is a dire need for urgency in closing these items, and in fact, urgency in all that we do in addressing climate change. We need urgency because the climate is not waiting for us. We have seen it this year with climate-related disasters in every corner of our beautiful planet. And we need to move expeditiously to close the emissions gap, the ambition gap, and most significantly, the implementation gap. In this regard, we are concerned about the limited progress we have seen in implementing the Glasgow Climate Pact. We are concerned because to date, only 29 countries have submitted their revised NDCs, and even these are not aligned with 1.5 degrees Celsius. Mr. President, we are also concerned because we have begun to see some of our partners backsliding on their commitments to end fossil fuel subsidies, backsliding on their commitments to begin the phase down of coal, and on their commitments to stop the flow of finance to fossil fuel investments. We are also concerned, Mr. President, about the slow progress on financing in general and financing for loss and damage in particular. This is a matter of the highest priority for my country, which has had more than its fair share of climate-related impacts in recent times. So as we gather here for the next 3 days, I call all of our partners to come to the table prepared to work on solutions, to come to the table with concrete proposals for ensuring that we do not lose this window of opportunity for avoiding the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, and to come to the table prepared to deliver on their commitments and obligations. Mr. President, my country has contributed significantly to this climate change process. It would be remiss of me if I do not take this opportunity to recognize the contributions of my fellow Grenadian and predecessor, Mr. Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of this convention. To date, Mr. President, we continue to set the standards higher through the creation of a new ministry. And as the Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy, and on behalf of the Government of Grenada, we will continue to give full support and our political commitment. And so in closing, Mr. President, you have our guarantee that we will continue to support this process and stand ready to assist you during the coming days to achieve great success at this COP27. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ms. Lupu Lama, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, je voudrais, au nom de Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la Transition, chef de l'État, chef suprême des armées, colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, remercier le gouvernement de la République arabe d'Égypte pour l'accueil chaleureux réservé à ma délégation et moi-même depuis notre arrivée dans cette cité magnifique de Sharm el-Sheikh. La Guinée étant partie à la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, au protocole de Kyoto et à l'accord de Paris, est engagée à contribuer à la réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. C'est ainsi qu'elle a validé les plans d'investissement et de partenariat de sa contribution déterminée nationale, les plans sectoriels climat et le 4e rapport des inventaires de gaz à effet de serre du premier rapport biennal, et ce, depuis la COP26 tenue à Glasgow. Toutefois, la mise en œuvre de ces programmes et projets nécessite la mobilisation de plus de 14 milliards de dollars. Monsieur le Président, d'après le rapport 2022 du groupe d'experts intergouvernemental sur l'évolution du climat, la Guinée contribue seulement à moins 0,1% des émissions mondiales de gaz à effet de serre. Monsieur le Président, la Guinée a déterminé un objectif inconditionnel de 20% déjà atteint et conditionnel de 49% d'ici 2030. L'atteinte de cet objectif conditionnel requiert le soutien des partenaires techniques et financiers pour la mise en œuvre d'initiatives permettant de réduire considérablement la dégradation de l'environnement à travers la gestion rationnelle et durable des ressources naturelles, l'augmentation du nombre d'aires protégées, la modernisation des secteurs de l'agriculture, des mines, des transports et la promotion des énergies vertes. La promotion et la protection de la biodiversité pour améliorer les capacités d'adaptation des populations face aux impacts des changements climatiques est une priorité pour notre gouvernement. Pour ce faire, la République de Guinée demande que le défi du financement climatique constaté depuis 2020 soit comblé et que le financement de l'adaptation soit doublé. Pour nous, la COP27 doit être une COP d'action et non une COP de nouvelles promesses. Les populations en général, et particulièrement les couches vulnérables, que sont les femmes, les filles, les enfants et les jeunes, subissent fortement les impacts de la crise climatique, car celle-ci amplifie les inégalités et met leur vie et leurs moyens de subsistance en danger. Elles expriment de multiples et pressants besoins et attendent des réponses immédiates et proportionnelles. C'est le lieu pour nous d'attirer l'attention de potentiels pollueurs et bailleurs de fonds sur l'insuffisance des fonds d'adaptation, mais surtout et aussi sur la complexité et la lourdeur de leurs procédures de décaissement et de les exhorter à plus de transparence et de flexibilité. Monsieur le Président, la République de Guinée soutient toutes les initiatives en faveur de l'environnement et du développement durable et reste solidaire aux préoccupations exprimées par les pays les moins avancés, par l'Afrique et le G77 plus la Chine. Par ma voix, le peuple et le gouvernement guinéen vous adressent leurs vives félicitations pour les moyens déployés, la qualité de l'organisation et la forte mobilisation à Sharm el-Sheikh de tous les acteurs en faveur de notre planète. Je vous remercie.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Fidelis Manuel Leit Manguez, Minister of the Council of Ministers and Extraordinary Envoy of the President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, CO2 emissions from fossil fuels and industry which power the world economy have been the primary driver of human-induced warming. Today, the richest 10% of the population across the industrialized world contributes to about 45% of greenhouse gas emissions, and yet they have the highest potential for emission reduction, whereas the poorest half emit 15% of emissions and are unfairly bearing the cost of environmental destructions. Further warming is inevitably occurring, closely coupled with climate and economic risks. The Global South will become more vulnerable to inequality, economic insecurity, food shortages, reduced water security, and malnutrition. The problems we face are large and urgent. If temperatures are to remain safe, the global economy must decarbonize and reach net zero emissions by 2050. To combat climate change, we will need to scale up decarbonization, as well as make significant changes for clean and justice-centered economic growth. Timor-Leste, an island state, is at the heart of the Wallace ecosystem, which contains some of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems. Through the practice of Tarabandu, Timor-Leste ensures the integrity and protection of its environment, making conservation and the sustainable use of natural resources a societal commitment. Despite protecting our marine biodiversity, coral reefs, and mangrove forests, we are frequently hit by extreme weather events and rising ocean temperatures. Recent tropical cyclones destroyed lives, 66,000 people were displaced, and over $300 million were lost in public infrastructures. If we do not refrain from continuing on the path of unrelenting economic growth, which accelerates global warming, then we will fail to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Insufficient political will persists, and responses are not preserving the environmental commons. I believe we may be able to maintain life and prevent reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius in the near future. Scaling up a sustainability transition with ambitious commitments across key industries and high-income countries is required for change that matters. To avert an irreversible planetary emergency requires achieving prosperity with less environmental depletion. It involves accelerating global action for investing in renewables, conservation, and for the development of green and clean growth. We propose moving toward deeper decarbonization with more ambitious climate action from multinational cooperation and defining how to activate the emissions responsibility. The Paris Agreement expects low carbon emissions in a manner where developed countries take the lead. Both the North and the South must commit to technology transfer, capacity building, greater climate financing, and accountability. Our path to growth must balance equitable and effective conservation, protection, and restoration of nature. Efforts should focus on 60% of the world's biosphere reserves that are in poor countries. The rich nations made the promise to deliver 100 billion to developing countries each year. It is economically and morally right to deliver by 2023.
and more than 100 billion must be raised and disbursed each year after that. They must provide plans for loss and damage finance. We stand at the brink. There is the danger of pushing developing countries into collapse. This is a reason to act faster. I invoke my President, His Excellency José Ramos Horta's call for a just energy transition as the policy of deterrence of our time for a global effort to avoid climate conflict and deliver new paths to prosperity. As for our part, I can tell you today that the government of Timor-Leste has enabled stronger steps in our new 2030 goals. We introduce a nature-positive integrated approach to adaptation, mitigation and economic development. Our government legislated a biodiversity conservation law to scale up our actions to fill the adaptation gap. To best reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, we have developed a blue economy finance roadmap to unlock new sources for the SDGs and sustainable use of ocean resources. To protect biodiversity as a strategy, our President has offered to leave our vast oil and gas reserves under the seabed. We look forward towards global financial contributions to this initiative. Finally, the time has come for climate justice, energy justice, water justice, and food justice with common and differentiated responsibility between the global north and the global south. In the global south, Timor-Leste and the Pacific small island developing states have established an adaptation alliance to take regional actions in order to build resilience. We therefore call for global support. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. James P.E. Shaw, Minister of Climate Change of New Zealand. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Mr. President, Excellencies, delegates, this 27th Conference of the Parties is being referred to as the Implementation COP. The Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC has invited us at the start of this conference to show evidence of how we have started to implement the decisions that we collectively made in Glasgow this time last year. Under Article 2.1a of the Paris Agreement on Mitigation, since Glasgow, New Zealand has set in law a set of emissions budgets from now until 2035. In order to meet those budgets, we have published our first emissions reduction plan covering every sector of the economy. We have set aside US $3 billion of revenue from our cap and trade scheme to recycle into the transition into a net zero future. Some of that revenue we are co-investing with private enterprise to bring forward large-scale capital investments to decarbonise industry and energy. Some of that revenue we have dedicated to reducing methane and nitrous oxide emissions from the farming sector. We have introduced vehicle emissions incentives and standards. As a result, electric vehicle sales have risen from 1% of all new cars sold 5 years ago to 5% of all new cars sold 1 year ago to now 30% of all new car sales in the last few months. Under Article 2.1b of the Paris Agreement on Adaptation, since Glasgow, we have published our first National Adaptation Plan. This National Adaptation Plan outlines how we will support our communities to become more resilient to the droughts, floods, fires and storms that we are already experiencing as a result of the 1.1 degrees of temperature warming that has already occurred. Under Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement on Finance, since Glasgow, we have passed a law requiring climate-related financial disclosures from large listed companies and from financial institutions, in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. In addition, this morning we announced that we will be issuing our first US $3 billion of sovereign green bonds to support our transition to a net zero future. Mr. President, across the world, the response to climate change must include and support Indigenous people. I arrive at COP27 with work underway to support an Indigenous framework for action that will be led by our Indigenous Māori people, by our Māori people, for Māori people. In addition, beg your pardon, we are running out of time. Before us lies a simple choice. Do we want a world that is defined by the ravages of climate change, or do we want a world that is cleaner, fairer, safer, and more productive than it is today? It seems like a simple choice, and yet we still cling to outdated thinking and practices. We're still clinging to the fossil-fueled world of the past. The latest report shows that our collective commitments only add up to a 2.4-degree world. Go and ask a young person what they think of that choice, what they think about the future that we are preparing for them. And brace yourselves for the answer, because they know, as do we, that a better world is possible. And they know that we have the means and the disposal at our disposal to create it. They know that all we lack is the political ambition and the will to make it happen. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to bold, enduring action on climate change, because in our region, the Blue Pacific, climate change is an existential challenge. In our region, 1.5 degrees is critical, and the decisions of this COP must reconfirm our commitment to 1.5, to Paris, and to the decisions that we made in Glasgow. As ever, it will be the most vulnerable who will be the worst affected, and we cannot stand by and knowingly let that happen. It is only through our collective action and our shared commitments that we will rise to the challenge and take that opportunity. So let's get to it. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. On behalf of the conference, I would like to thank you all for your statements. Distinguished delegates, we will continue with the delivery of national statements today at 15 hours in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, the CMP and CMA adjourned.